God help us all. It's the South Park video. And this is truly one of the monumental challenges of any media analysis commentary YouTuber, because it's a long franchise with a lot of stuff going on, and a hell of a lot to cover if you really want to feel like you've said it all. And while I could maybe stretch this out over multiple entries and milk the formula, instead I decided to just do it all at once, and cover not just one trans episode, not just 2 episodes, not just 3 episodes, not just 4 episodes, not just 5 episodes, not just 6 episodes, but 7 whole episodes with elements or narratives or analogies that have seen them be compared to trans identity or the trans community in the past. Good lord, that is a lot of episodes, and presumably means this video is going to be rather long. So in the interest of brevity, let's just get straight into the first one of interest to us. Part of what I like to call the Garrison arc of the show, a period of time when the trans representation was all centered around a single character, in between them being a stereotype of a freaky perverted gay man who keeps a sex slave and a Donald Trump effigy.
So you been okay with the fuck everyone to death, all the Muslim and Mexican shit, but fingers in the ass did it for you? Cool, just wanted to see where your line was.
Yeah, Garrison was really where they dumped the unrelatable and strange that was too much for even other characters. To start us off, we launch with Mr. Garrison's fancy new Vagina, Season 9's opening volley, and the introduction to a whole new era of South Park.
Going down South Park, gonna leave my woes behind.
So the episode begins with Mr. Garrison at the surgeon's, with the doctor giving them the vaginoplasty, and Garrison saying how they have been a woman in a man's body their whole life, so this sex change is the last chance to truly feel happy. Now, firstly, holy crap, this is moving fast, isn't it? We really rapidly jumped into the plot, and that's because while you can accuse South Park of many things, being slow is not one of them. The second thing of note here is that this is already building an idea that will become relevant to the end of the Garrison arc, when they detransition, spoilers, which is that view that Garrison has been rushed into this procedure, that speedily getting a sex change is the only way to be happy, something they've convinced themselves of. An important note for a character who is oft defined by their eternal searching for an identity of sorts to fill the void inside.
Cause when they said that this was the land of the free, I'm pretty sure that they were referring to me.
That's useful to note because it is part of the core message behind a lot of worries about transitioning. The worries that the person doing it isn't doing it for the right reasons, and is merely becoming a woman because they have mental issues, or they are an autogenophile, as Ray Blanchard, the twat, would like to also throw out. That one is from Blanchard's typology of transsexualism, which posits that trans women fit into one of 2 groups. Either those who transition because they want to have sex, imagining themselves as a woman, or those who transition because they want to be gay but don't feel comfortable with it. A typology that is, well, that's pretty transphobic because it attempts to paint trans women as being sexually deviant men no matter how they go about it, that the entire process of transition is built around sexual identity, and it doesn't really take into account, like, asexual people, or those who transition for, like, gender identity reasons, i.e., pretty much all trans people.
Does it 100% lose all of its ties somewhere in the depths of the brain to sexual orientation? I don't know. Probably not, but
Okay, we are getting off episode a little bit here, and that's because the rest of this scene at the surgeon's is a very graphic surgical description and visual aid with real footage of a sex reassignment surgery, or SRS, both of which I can't show to you in this video for many, many reasons. The important thing here is how this is played, as the Doctor begins this whole thing by saying, pointedly, almost directly to audience, that if only more people could just see this surgery happen, then they would realise it's a perfectly natural thing to get done.
I think if more people could just see a sex change operation, they would know how perfectly natural it is. The first thing I'm going to do is slice your balls.
The juxtaposition at work here is that you are meant to think of how gross this surgery is, how it clearly isn't natural or okay, and that the joke is built on that entire premise. It reminds me somewhat of the Ida surgery from Family Guy, which also transformed the surgery into this horror show-esque grotesqueness, an appeal to cis audience sensibilities around it that is frankly fucking stupid because it just looks like every other bloody surgery. No surgeries look good. You're cutting into a person's body, a thing that our brain tells us, no bad, body parts and bloody should be on inside of skin, not outside. But that's not really the takeaway here, is it? Nobody is having a laugh at people getting medically necessary surgery for their health. It's specifically trans people and trans surgery that is on the chopping block. Pun intended. The next scene involving Mr. Garrison, specifically, don't worry, I've not forgotten the B-plots of this episode, and I will be covering them at the end in a discussion of how they relate to the entire attitude presented here. Don't you worry, I do sort of remember how to do video analysis, kind of. But Mr. Garrison is walking into the local supermarket and announcing that something is different, that he is a woman now, as he goes around kind of freaking out all the other women by being obnoxious and excited about the basic identity of womanhood, as the binary system of femininity that we have set up established it to look like.
Can you believe it, ladies? I'm one of you now! Wow, just look at all these tampons!
Now, of course, the scene ends on a shit joke. Literally. He, she, they, it's hard to say exactly what the correct pronouns are because of the nightmare way in which the show approaches and handles Garrison and Garrison's gender identity, but I'll go with she for now, or they, because that seems the closest to right. Well, Garrison is shitting in the toilet, and all the women leave horrified by that fact, because women, of course, never have bad shits. Everyone knows that. Only men can truly shit like that. Trust me, that's a bit that will come back in a few episodes' time.
Say, any of you ladies want to go see a sad movie together?
But in all of this mockery of Garrison here, a mockery that I think is built upon this view of trans women who have recently transitioned, leaping headfirst into expressing joy at the norms of womanhood in a frankly cringe manner according to cis audiences who laugh at it, well, that fails to understand that for many trans women, this is the first time they have felt comfortable or safe or able to engage with that stuff. It's part of the euphoric element of transitioning. Something that does get waylaid a little bit by the media's and medical society's focus upon the dysphoric side of things. My honest response to this is that just let trans women be a little bit cringe about it. Like, my god, it's not hurting anybody, and this is a big deal for some of them. In real life, I have found cis women to generally be very accepting of this, and to also be supportive and encouraging to those with these fresh experiences, as well as offering advice that they have learned from dealing with this shit for decades. This whole bit then sort of ties into and leads into our B-plots, which sort of end up becoming the A-plot for a while. It's rather confusing, as Kyle sees Garrison in her new body and gets explained at the dinner table by his parents a basic interpretation of what transgender people are. His mother outlining the essentials of how sometimes people internally feel different to how they externally look. A response to Kyle's father wanting to pull them out of school because a trans teacher raises too many questions that he doesn't want to answer, and that he fears will infect the children with ideas that they cannot understand or that are not okay.
That does it. I'm taking you boys out of that school.
Gerald, that is very close-minded of you.
He's a teacher. How are we supposed to explain this to our children?
A fear that is literally realised as Kyle, who failed to get into the basketball team at the start of the episode, takes this message from his mother as an indicator that if he feels like he wants to be a basketball player, then he can be a basketball player. And in his mind, that requires him to be tall and black, rather than short and Jewish. That is not me inserting my own bigotries in here. I just want to reassure you that that's literally stated open messaging from the show. None of that's me. This kind of plays into the idea that trans identity is dangerous around kids because it encourages them to want to become unrealistic things. Like those trans panic stories about schools installing litters for children who identify as dogs now, or some shit.
And so yesterday I heard that at least one of our schools has in one of the unisex bathrooms, a litter box for the kids that identify as cats.
It's all tied up in this notion that telling kids about trans people and their lives and explaining how this is normal and okay is a slippery slope to people identifying as all kinds of things and destroying the very social fabric of our society. It's a very conservative message from a show who viewed themselves as fence-sitting and above it all, taking potshots at both sides, a fact that we will discuss further in the chapter about South Park and Satire, so go watch that if you want to see that. Kyle takes this to the doctor, who seems shocked by this revelation at first, the fact that Kyle feels like a tall black man and not a short Jewish person, and then the doctor seems to click and says a surgery name that I do not think I want to repeat for many, many reasons.
I hate being small and Jewish. I feel like a tall black man.
Oh, you want a negroplasty?
But what we see here is the medical system being showcased as perfectly fine doing surgeries on children because it's all in the name of realigning their identity, and they use these fancy medical sounding terms to make it all seem legitimate, which is more positioning from the show that takes the exact side of and works within the conservative narratives and TERF narratives that have become dominant as the arguments against trans people existing in wider society. Legitimately, this entire bit about a person who transitions for potentially silly reasons, i.e. Garrison, influencing kids into not being okay with themselves, and then the surgeons being totally okay performing this stuff on them, is a play-by-play representation of one of the main anti-trans arguments right now. And based on where the comedy is being pointed at, based on where the hyperbolic ridiculousness resides, we are meant to be agreeing with how crazy all of this sounds. Meanwhile, Garrison gets back home to Mr. Slave, their homosexual partner who they got specifically to try and get fired as a gay man in a previous episode, but that everyone was okay with, so then Mr. Slave just ended up becoming a permanent feature of the character.
Take that, Slave, you take it! This should get me fired for sure.
And Garrison discovers that Mr. Slave doesn't want to sleep with them anymore, as Mr. Slave is gay and hates vaginas, and that Mrs. Garrison should have checked with how everyone else around them would feel before they went ahead and got this surgery. This is meant to be part of the whole Garrison rushing into things idea, that this character really does go full on into stuff with no real consideration of those around them. But in reality land over here, a trans person doesn't owe other people an explanation or justification for their transness. While it does probably befit you to talk with your partner about these feelings and to ease them into it, ultimately, you don't have to judge whether you should transition off of their attitude. You shouldn't have to stay miserable and unhappy because otherwise it would upset your partner. If that's the case, then you should call that relationship quits because it clearly isn't going to work. Mrs. Garrison then expresses that internalized homophobia that never truly went away and only seems to have been exaggerated since turning into a woman, as she shouts the word fag at Mr. Slave and runs him out, telling him that all men are alike and good luck finding other men.
You're just gonna walk out? You men are all alike! Go ahead and find somebody who doesn't have a vagina, you fag!
Garrison is never a likeable character, honestly. Never redeemable in any fashion. And the fact that she is the one who transitions does of course sour the entire fucking vibe of the maybe trans character that she's meant to be. Kyle then tells his parents about the surgery that he's going to get. The surgery to turn him into a tall black person so that he can live out his identity as a basketball player. And do I need to do this? Do I need to even bother explaining what is wrong with these narratives here? With these allegories and jabs? Like, if you can't see why this is a problem to the trans community, I don't know what I can possibly say that would convince you otherwise. But in the interest of covering all possible angles, I will persevere onwards. And Kyle's parents are obviously shocked. Gerald has a go at Sheila for her transgender progressive thinking, causing this transracial idea in their child.
Oh, just great. You see, Sheila? This is what your transgender progressive thinking gets you. Now your son wants to be transracial.
And Sheila tells Kyle that he cannot have the money for the surgery, which then leads to Kyle defending that all his life he has felt black, that he likes rap and UPN and basketball, and his parents are stumped by that argument. An argument that uses the sad tonality music, which is meant to tell us that a serious point is being made here. Presumably a satirical play by South Park on how the same music plays when trans people talk about why they want to transition or did transition. And so we really are meant to be considering all of this in the same lumped area.
Well, all my life I felt I was black. My body doesn't reflect who I am inside. Why? Why do I have to accept it when I can change it?
Kyle storms upstairs as his parents remain steadfast in that he cannot be transracial, while Gerald storms out of the house to go and confront the doctor. And I know, we have to at least look at the transracial thing. So, here's the deal. For those people who look at this South Park comparison between transgender and transracial and think to themselves, well, that basically is the same thing. If we're gonna let one of those there crazies do what they want, why not the other? The issue with putting these two things on the same level is the basis of their identity formation. Gender exists as an innate sense of self, and can form from a very early age. And no, I'm not referring here to the fucking binary idea of man and woman that people cling to so hard. I'm talking about the various affects that go into those gendered stereotypes, but that exist as part of the perception one has of oneself detached from those ideas. It exists in a very individualistic bubble, You don't inherit gender. There is no ancestral context or familial descent of it, which is not the same for race. Much of the social construct of race is tied up in that long-standing history of the people that you belong to, an identity that you share with your family and with your ancestors, as well as a shared community, culture, and in some cases, trauma that is an essential part of that identity. Transracial people often only adopt the parts of the cultural community that they like. They take the bits that are enjoyable to them with none of that historical or cultural context. And at its core, it is just a hyper-intensified form of cultural appropriation, especially when all it really focuses on is the physical aspect of the identity. Something that transracial people often only do because being a white person, it generally is almost always a white person like Rachel Dolezal or Ollie London. The only thing they really have to conform themselves to this race that they have no connection to is by making themselves physically look like what they imagine that race looks like.
Have you done something to darken your complexion?
I certainly don't stay out of the sun, don't put on blackface as a performance.
An idea which is itself kinda racist? Look, we could keep talking in circles here, but the plain and simple fact of it is that race and gender are different things, and being transgender is an individualized internal experience of self, while transracial is an outside interpretation of a community that is then refracted through that person's own lens. Getting back to the episode, Gerald goes to the doctor and threatens to get him shut down for malpractice, before the doctor uses mental manipulation to convince Gerald that, well, he likes dolphins, and with the marvels of modern science, he can turn Gerald into a dolphin like he loves, because ever since he was a child, he wanted to be a dolphin.
Make me a dolphin?
If I could swim with the dolphins.
I don't need to do a bit here about trans animalism, right? I don't have to try and argue the transphobia at play in putting transgender people in the same category as this, right? Please just let me get a pass. Mrs. Garrison also shows up to a Girls Gone Wild taping and pulls out her tits, to the grossness of all the men and women around watching this. Even though, literally, what difference is there between the breasts of a trans woman and a cis woman? Seriously, it's one of the many areas where there actually is no discernible fucking difference because of the magic of human biological development, where every human can grow breasts with merely the right hormonal changes. Although this raises the question of, is Garrison even on HRT? Something that we never get answered. Garrison is also continuing to express their womanhood in a way that aligns with the base stereotypes of femininity, making this more of an emphasis upon the fact that Garrison's transition is merely aligning with not an internalized gender identity, but in fact just becoming what she perceives women to be from an outside perspective. No reference to anything inside. See that whole transracial thing from earlier.
Oh boy, men will do just about anything to get a look at our tits, won't they? Men are all the same.
Which is sort of why South Park is doing this comparative exemplar between all of them. Because in their eyes, it is basically the same thing. Which showcases a complete lack of perspective and interaction from actual trans people, and makes this a truly offensive stereotype that harmfully displays a bigoted version of trans identity. Certainly not a winner. We also see that Garrison is hyper-fixated on the idea that they will get a period. A hyper-fixation which belays the fact that they didn't really understand what they were doing, nor were they properly informed by their doctor. but will play a fun part in a very transphobic bit towards the end of the episode. So, you know, look forward to that one. Gerald gets turned into a dolphin person thing. And, I mean, it's clearly not a good thing that he got these surgeries, but now he is pro Kyle getting the surgeries to become a tall black kid, which is also just bad?
Gerald, this is crazy!
Oh, I used to think I was crazy, but Dr. Biber told me that there are a lot of other people out there who are trans species.
I'm not 100% certain exactly what the point underneath this satire is here, except for showcasing the flaws of allowing people and telling people that whatever they feel like they are inside is something that they can become. And that all just being rooted down to transgender people as a motivator for this wacky other identity stuff. That really does feel like all that it could be saying here. And Kyle gets turned into a tall black kid and goes to reattempt the basketball stuff, and it goes well for him, and that's just me trying to keep you up to date with what's going on in the episode. Back to something that I can at least have commentary on. Garrison is at the Planned Parenthood, after being told that one of the reasons for not getting a period is being pregnant. Because, yet again, nobody explained to Garrison, I guess, the expectations of what transitioning and transitioning surgery can do for them. And Garrison does what she has done at every other fucking establishment so far, which is creep out the women around her and make them feel uncomfortable by her open discussion of her body.
Yeah, I discovered a few days ago I wasn't bleeding out my coo, so I guess I'm knocked up.
The doctor and the nurse at this Planned Parenthood are, however, shocked to see Garrison there, with the doctor calling them Mr. Garrison, in direct contradiction of the gender identity that she is at least currently presenting as, with the doctor also explaining to Garrison that she does not have the ability to get periods or have pregnancies, continually referring to them as Mr. Garrison during this, saying that he does not have ovaries or a womb from the sex change, with Garrison then responding with this line in particular here.
This would mean I'm not really a woman. I'm just a guy with a mutilated penis.
Basically, yes.
Now, this fails to really understand, of course, everything about transgender people, and about gender identity, but also about womanhood. Being a real woman is not defined by your physical features. A cis woman who cannot have kids, who does not have a functioning womb or ovaries, is not suddenly a man. If you transplanted a penis onto a cis woman, that would not make her a man either. Remember, it's an internalized identity that is not dependent upon external features to exist, but that people often choose to adjust their external self to align with that internalized self. This really is the bit to me here that signals how Garrison and how South Park approaches transgender identity, through the lens of it being almost voyeurism of womanhood. That transitioning is done to experience what being a woman is like for these mentally ill men. A clearly and definitively transphobic approach to the whole affair that reaffirms that whole idea that they never bothered talking or listening to a single fucking trans person before making the fucking trans episode. I dread to think how many cis people in the audience internalized these attitudes towards trans people. How many took these allegories and ideas to heart, and how they themselves would go on to act as if all trans people were just like this, monolithically conforming us to this utterly reprehensible version of the community. And in response, Garrison wants to get turned back into a man, because if they can't have an abortion or periods, then they're just a freak, not a woman, according to them themselves.
Well, what kind of woman can't have abortions and bleed out her snatch once a month? You made me into a freak is what you did, and I want you to change me bad!
And so they drag the doctor off to find their scrotum and balls, which have been used for Kyle's knees and for Gerald's dolphin fin. You know, for a show that explicitly put in a literal, real-world vaginoplasty at the beginning to disturb their audience, you would think they would know what is involved in the surgery and that the testicles get chucked into medical waste and the scrotum is often used in the construction of the labia, but I guess not. There is a bit about Gerald demanding that the basketball stadium make arrangements for trans-species people like them because they don't have a dolphin bathroom for them to go to.
Damn it, you people have to make special arrangements for trans-species people like me. I may be a dolphin, but I'm also a lawyer.
Which, I mean, just end me now. Seriously, I'm steadily learning to re-hate South Park after not watching it for like 5 to 6 years, and it is taking me the fuck out. The doctor and the kids and Garrison rush into the ball game, as Kyle cannot play on his knees or they will break. There is a scuffle with the guards as these people don't have tickets to the game. Kyle fucks up his knees by jumping and hooping or whatever people do in basketball. I don't know, I don't play sports. The doctor then tells both Kyle and Gerald that these were cosmetic surgeries and that he will change them back. But Garrison is stuck like this because their scrotum and their testicles were destroyed in the whole everything that happened at the end of this episode. And to camera, Garrison tells us that they might actually be okay. Because while they will never be a real woman, they would rather be a woman with no periods than a fag.
Even though I'm not truly a woman, I think I still like the new me. I'd rather be a woman who can't have periods than a fag.
Hey, that's Ray Blanchard's homosexual trans woman typology in action. Now I see where South Park got its trans narrative from. The worst fucking person in the entire goddamn world to listen to on the subject. It all makes sense now.
One type was associated with ordinary homosexuality. You might think of them as like Kinsey Nines.
And that's the episode. But that's not the episode. Or at least that's not it yet. I don't want to do my post-episode analysis because I think I kind of covered most of the issues during, but also because this episode is really just part one of a larger narrative. To truly sit down and sift through what the message was, we need to first finish up the quadrilogy of episodes that make up the Trans Garrison arc. Which means that it's time to move to part 2. Season 10's episode 13, Go God Go 12. Woohoo! God, I hope the rest of these are shorter episodes, because otherwise we could be here for hours. Oh god, we are here for hours! Okay, thankfully, Go God 12 is an episode which somewhat features Garrison in a prominent role, specifically that they are married to Richard Dawkins in the far distant future that Cartman is experiencing after freezing himself to get a Nintendo Wii, a future caused by Garrison being convinced of atheism by Dawkins, and so now 3 atheist factions fight over the world. This is South Park. I think one of the most fascinating reviews of this episode was from Dawkins himself, wherein he said, "I'll be buggered if I know what me buggering a balding transvestite has to do with making any kind of satirical point." Because while I do disagree with Dawkins on a lot of things, I think he is a pretentious twat who paved the way for the wave of the intellectual dark web with his holier-than-thou or not holier-than-thou attitude as it were. I do think he has at least some kind of point there. It's not very clear what Go God XII was trying to say with that. Regardless, the advantage of this episode not really being centered around Garrison's transgender identity so much is that we can ignore most of it in favour of that quick summary from earlier. All you really need to be aware of is that Dawkins and Garrison have filthy, dirty, perverted sex, that their marriage caused religion to be eradicated, and that Cartman is trying to call the past with a time phone to fix the future.
Alright, listen! Listen to me carefully. You need to be patient. What? Who the hell is this? It's me!
In desperation, Cartman calls Dawkins, mid-coitus with Garrison, who picks up on him, and becomes one of the few people to do so when they realise that it's Cartman, because Cartman is pretty much hated by everyone on the show for being a real condensed expression of the worst kind of child. So we start our analysis from here, because this is the transgender bit of relevance to us. Oh, also, just so you know, everyone misgenders Garrison continually throughout all of this, because that's just how South Park rolls. For now, she presents as Mrs. Garrison or Miss Garrison, and so calling her a woman and treating her like that is the most optimal approach for this period for me, as that is what she is at the time. It gets complicated because of the later detransition and the way that the show itself has no bloody clue how to insert or handle or use a trans character as anything more than this gay man adjacent joke. Anyway, the misgendering is relevant because Cartman refers to Miss Garrison as Mr. Garrison, which Dawkins is confused over, as Garrison had claimed that Mr. Garrison passed away, which leads to Cartman saying this.
Look, asshole! This is a real emergency! Just pass the phone to whatever Garrison wants to call himself since the sex change operation!
Upon finding this out, Dawkins leaps out of bed, yells, "You're a man!" while looking horrified, and runs away naked. This leads to Garrison reverting to her religiously bigoted attitude, calling Dawkins an atheist faggot, and so by destroying this budding relationship, Cartman is able to reset the future they are trapped in and stop it from ever occurring.
Have fun mocking God in hell, you queer!
Garrison! Garrison!
Yup. The solution to this horrifying atheist war future was the outing of a trans woman and the subsequent horrified response from the cis man she was sleeping with. Legitimately, I've seen trans panic stuff from shows before, and it's never very good. The milder responses being grossness and assaults, and the worst being extreme violence and murder. But a show making it so that the trans panic of a cis man is the only way to stop a future world war is... well, that's some new level of point made about that notion, I guess.
Richard, hold on, I can explain. Explain? How could I be so stupid?
As I said, this is really a minor episode in the Garrison trans arc. All it really shows or tells us is that Garrison is somewhat ashamed of their trans identity and their sex change, or is hiding it from potential partners so that they can sleep with them, as well as showing us that repeated media view that cis men sleeping with trans women makes the cis man gay, that the trans woman is not a real woman, and is still, for all intents and purposes, a man. And that's just basic bog-standard transphobia that South Park is expressing here, and ultimately continues to express throughout. It doesn't build a strong case of anything specific, but I like to think this episode does help to reinforce the already existing idea that we might have towards how fucking terrible trans people get it in this particular animated cartoon. Our next real full-time episode that I have to analyse from start to finish is Season 11's Episode 6, D-Yikes, about Miss Garrison sleeping with lesbians. Oh, great. That kind of plotline is terrible in the hands of shows with more tact and grace than South Park has in their little finger. Can't wait to see what nightmare scenario gets used here. So yeah, you can probably already guess where this is going to go. And it is fascinating that because of how much South Park there is, it really does manage to cover almost all of the bases that transphobia utilises for attacking the trans community. Something that I think will become much more important for my attempt at a conclusion paragraph. But for right now, I just wanted to bring that up because it stood out to me. Anyways, the episode D-Yikes begins for us with Miss Garrison berating her class over the fact that a man brought up her trans identity when Miss Garrison went on a date with him. Something that must have made the date awkward or ended it, because she seems very caught up on this, and taking out her aggression on the class, who have clearly also seen this happen often enough by this point that they are audibly and visually worried about what happens next.
Oh God, here we go again. Uh-oh, this isn't good.
Did I say something to you, sugar tits?
No, ma'am.
What happens next is that Garrison forces all the lads to have to read and write an essay on Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, blaming it specifically on the fact that they are boys, and that they only think with their penises, and that they've stopped having penises so much they would get more work done. I mean, it's a continuation of that theme of Garrison being this deeply, deeply flawed interpretation of whatever the fuck Garrison is supposed to be parodying here. An extremist who jumps from cause to cause depending on what appeals to them most. And in this case, that means being a woman now. And so they become a misandrist, because they have to express their own identity in a form of hatred against another. Yeah, I think that description does sound about right for everything I've seen on Garrison throughout the many, many years and seasons in which the character has appeared. We then jump to Garrison still venting their frustrations at a woman's only gym, which is nice to see that this trans woman is able to go to this woman's only gym, though I wonder how much of that is specifically because the women might not know that Garrison is a trans woman, and there is a play here between the way that regular women express themselves in this scene, and in regards to the gym as a place to avoid being ogled, and Garrison hyperbolically emphasizing a similar thing. Like they are playing up being a woman for the other people around them.
They can all rot in hell! Who needs men anyway? They're goddamn arrogant, self-centered assholes is what they are!
Something that was part of the previous episodes that featured them, and might be part of some kind of commentary on the trans expression of gender identity. Or maybe not. It's not always clear exactly what the intentions of the comedy is, and you kind of have to guess your way to what the audience or what people would interpret of it. Which, with South Park, means thinking about how the average, edgy 15-year-old teenager views the world. So, not great for minorities and their comfort or safety, to be honest. Allison, the person that Garrison is talking to, invites Garrison down to Lesbos, the girl bar for girls downtown. And it's pretty clear to anyone who is paying any kind of attention that this is a lesbian and a lesbian bar, which means that Garrison doesn't get it at all, and will probably get surprised by it for comedic effect in what I would guess is about 1 minute screen time?
All the girls here seem to know each other.
Yeah, well, most of the girls here have done each other.
Yeah, Done what?
And yeah, about on cue, Garrison finds out and freaks out and runs off to the bathroom, claiming that they are not a lesbian, reacting in a way which is partly influenced by their upbringing and lifestyle as a rigid Christian from a rural American town.
Oh, jeez! But I'm not a... Whoa!
There is then a romantic build-up here, as Allison convinces Garrison to consider the idea of being with a woman, of giving it a try, a joke which presumably lands with the audience because Garrison was a gay man previously and didn't go in for that kind of thing, presumably. And then this sort of almost sweet sapphic romance stuff immediately jumps to very crude and aggressive scissoring, as if a straight cis man and his straight cis man friend were the ones who created this because they don't know what lesbians get up to and are just basing it entirely off of the one sexual act that people heavily associate with that group and will hopefully get a laugh out of those edgy 15-year-old teenage boys. A big part of me also wonders how much of a joke for the audience here is in the way that we are meant to think about Garrison. Because there isn't much comedy in the build-up scene with Allison unless you are actually thinking to yourself, Garrison is a man. And them talking about all this lesbian stuff is funny because, a man and a woman is not lesbian, the doy. A thought process that would be confirmed if the show does a bit around the lesbians finding out that Garrison is a trans woman in a hyper-negative light, like the end of the previous Garrison episodes. That would be the real confirmation here of, I think, what we are supposed to take away as some kind of internalized truth behind the satire. I'm ready to be wrong about that, though. Regardless, Garrison is in a much better mood, because they are finally getting some action without judgment, and so they let the whole class off from having to hand in that essay right now, which is fortunate for our main characters, as their attempt to pass that work off to migrant Mexican workers did not succeed.
Alright, did you write the 4 essays?
See, we all wrote essays for you.
You said you all wrote essays. Where are they?
Well, my essay lives in Miami.
Oh, yeah, that's the B-plot that we can mostly just ignore because there's nothing trans going on there. Garrison then announces to the class that they are gay, to which the class is kind of confused because they've been through this one before, the transition. So it just seems like it keeps happening over and over again.
I'm gay.
Again?
But the class is supportive of Garrison being a lesbian, mostly because it puts her in a good mood, and they don't have to deal with really shitty homework, so I guess that's a kind of allyship when you think about it.
That's great! Let's hear it for teacher being a lesbian! Yeah!
Garrison then goes into the lesbian bar again, and begins being themselves, an over-the-top sex addict who makes other people feel uncomfortable, even when they are initially welcoming, and it also makes me continually worry about how much of this is based around a horrifying interpretation of what some people see queer people as, even when it's played in contrast with other queer people. Like, I get that this is specifically Garrison attitude shit, but we have so few trans people within South Park that Garrison is the dominant view and conception of our lives, and the way in which the earlier show explored trans topics. This is what we get, and most of what we have to work from. So I do think that worry about how the audience of, yet again, 15-year-old edgy teenage boys will internalize bigoted notions of trans people from this is somewhat justified, and will hopefully be explored more in depth in my chapter on the satire stuff. Putting a lot of weight on me down the line, and I hope I can live up to it. For the episode, Garrison immediately takes somebody telling her to stop hitting on her girlfriend as a reason to begin fighting. A fight that also involves her sexually assaulting that person too during it, which is all kinds of fucked up.
Oh, we're scissoring. Oh, yeah, scissor.
And I don't even know what to think about this. But the fight is interrupted by the news that the lesbian bar is getting shut down because it got sold to Persians. The use of that word instead of Iranians makes me think I vaguely know where this might be going. Zack Snyder's 300 ringing any bells to people here? And Garrison does that thing, where she worms her way into the story and history of others and claims it for herself, staking this lesbian bar as part of her identity now too.
Yeah, this is our home. We aren't going anywhere. We have a history here.
Which could also be seen as a very negative comment on the nascent trans community and its interaction with other queer groups, especially from an outside cis-straight person's view of that whole thing, which is exactly what we are getting. So I guess it's not too surprising. There is a bit of racism here from Garrison. There's a bit of a surprise from the mayor about the fact that Garrison is a lesbian now. And then the Persians send a scouting party to talk to the capital L lesbians. And it goes poorly because Garrison wants the bar to stay as a gay bar. And then she kicks the dude in the crotch while slow-mo and music plays.
This is Lesbos!
So, yeah, my claim about this being a 300 parody was totally right. We can skip through, like, the entirety of the plot and all the stuff that isn't trans or is just like a direct link to the film's plotline now. Easy peasy. And one thing I will note here is that a lot of the characters and the narrator for this one do refer to Garrison with the correct pronouns, as it would be currently used for how she identifies at that moment, even if such a thing changes down the line. So, I mean, into the script at least is written that baseline of respect that a lot of other shows don't even bother doing. In the interest of fair reviewing and analysing, I thought I should at least bring that up. Then the episode gets complicated, as the Mexican migrant workers that Garrison hires to dress as Persians to infiltrate the club and get some secrets don't ask questions. Please, just don't ask any questions about all of that. Come back with the information that Xerxes, the leader of the Persians, is actually a woman who pretends to be a man because women can't be the boss in Persian culture.
I know you're actually a woman.
How did you find that out?
And Garrison appeals to Xerxes with the fact that lesbians respect all women, regardless of facts like that. That men are judgmental in those regards, but queer people will be understanding and see the woman inside you no matter what. And that good moral music is playing here, which means I think this is meant to be the takeaway from the episode for the audience. Before it then goes into Garrison and Xerxes aggressively scissoring one another. Slightly ruined maybe, but that's South Park, I guess. No big deal is made about Garrison's transition here. My initial skepticism about its handling of lesbians and their finding out about that fact was unfounded and unaddressed. It didn't even go close to that route. If anything, if you ignore the mild racism and the weird interpretation of lesbian sex, it ends up being a pretty trans-positive and queer-positive story. Sort of. Great by South Park standards. How about that tagline?
You know, a long time ago when I first realized I was a lesbian, I felt isolated, confused. Finally, I found a place that accepts me for who I am.
And definitely in contrast with how the previous episodes have handled things, a huge improvement. But can that improvement continue onwards? Can that improvement be a steadily growing incline? Or is it about to tank like the value of NFTs? Well, the next episode is Eek, a Penis, which is the one where Garrison detransitions after they got kinda over this whole being a woman thing, and then in fact that surgery they got originally that was rapidly moved into and destroyed their penis, and therefore the feeling that they could become a man again was truly just a big ol' mistake. A worrying version of trans people and medical realities that they deal with that gets dealt with there, and yeah, this might not be the improvement we're looking for. Especially, not least of which, because it detransitions the character. So we lose the only thing we even have close to a repeated trans woman in the show. It's like de-representation, really. So yeah, don't get your hope up as we get into Season 12's Episode 5. The episode begins with Mrs. Garrison having another meltdown in front of her class. A reasonably common occurrence for the character, to be honest, wherein she details how she was sexually lost and confused, and she saw this woman on Oprah who had her sex changed to be a man, but then got pregnant, and that just means that, therefore, the man was actually a woman all along, and the fact that Garrison can't get pregnant means that she is still a man. And wait, hold up a fucking second. That was the end conclusion from the Doctor in the episode at the very beginning of all this arc.
That means I'm really still a man. I still feel like a man. I'm just a guy with a mutilated penis.
Basically, yes.
Have we really transitioned narratively nowhere since then? Garrison hasn't had an opportunity to understand their gender identity removed from it being revolved around that biological obsession with being somewhat capable to be pregnant? A biological obsession that only weird cis people have because they don't understand that, like, a number of cis women also can't get pregnant, and that doesn't suddenly stop them from being women? Like, what I'm getting at here is that behind all these jokes and bits, there wasn't any character development or any kind of trans representation or trans identity getting portrayed here at all. At the end of the day, we started at a certain point, which is that Garrison wanted to fully become a woman, specifically to be able to experience this trendy version of womanhood in their head. Discovered that they couldn't do that one thing, the pregnancy thing, and then attempted to abandon it only to get stuck there because their genitals were destroyed. And they then tried to make the best of it, infiltrating a lesbian group, tricking Richard Dawkins into sleeping with them along the way. That's where this whole thing began. And so the episode that it ends in is a natural progression of all of that, really. This was never going to be good, or comfortable, or watchable, or even something that one could point at as having some advantageous messages like Family Guy, or King of the Hill, or American Dad. Yeah, those are the examples I am using in contrast, because they are significantly more trans representation positive than South Park ever was even close to, even in a satirized sense of the notion, being. Sorry, I got a little bit incensed there. And I admit that my minor monologue breakdown from literally the first 20 seconds of the episode is probably not promising to my continued viewing of it, but we have to get through this so that I can finally wrap up the Garrison arc and move to the trans stuff that exists outside of that character. So let's continue that now.
And I say, Doctor, I want to go back to being a man. And he says, well, there's been too much damage. You can't go back. Where are you going to find a penis?
The sex change was a mistake. Garrison was rushed into it by a flawed doctor and the flawed medical system. And, well, maybe this is why we shouldn't allow people to transition, right? Because this is what it could be like. People can get sucked into it.
My whole life has just been one big screw up, you know? I admit it, I was sexually lost. And then I see this person on Oprah.
But Garrison gets removed from the school until they can sort out their personal life. and reobtain their penis, I guess, because the penis is the defining feature of being a man in the eyes of the characters and the creators who crafted those characters. And we will not deviate from that message because it might as well be what cis people think of gender. At least cis people who watch South Park anyways. Garrison then sees a laboratory that is engaging in some ethically questionable practices with animals on the news. A lab that is able to grow body parts onto animals, and realizes that this is the answer to his prayers. I'm saying his because I guess I should start using him for Garrison now, because he just said that he always identified as a man anyways, which does make me think I should have always been using him, but then during some of the episodes he was very committed to being seen as a woman, and for people to refer to him as her, so I've got no fucking clue what the situation is there. I guess I'm just gonna have to do the best I can with flawed information, and if people come at me for misgendering South Park's trans ? Character, fuck you. Fuck you for taking that line with this show, because they don't have a clear fucking idea either, you twats. People ask me if I would ever go into higher education and teach as a professor, because I have an aura, I guess, that screams that, to which I often respond with, 1, I'm not that smart. I make silly pop culture videos for YouTube. 2, I don't have the education to be able to get a job like that, and most universities don't accept YouTube videos on your CV. And 3, you can't get away with calling your students twats or telling them to go fuck themselves, which I can do here on this platform, so why would I ever want to leave? Garrison goes to the lab and uses the trans rhetoric line of how they are a man trapped in a woman's body, and that they need that penis, which frankly ignores the whole breasts that they have too, but let's be honest, that's never properly been explained at all or properly addressed or acknowledged. Like, Garrison, as I said earlier on, I don't think is on hormones or HRT, they just got a bunch of surgeries, and that was it. Because either Parker and Stone didn't bother researching trans people at all and don't know HRT exists, or didn't care enough to put that into the show for their audience to see and visually acknowledge that that's a part of transitioning, even though they were very comfortable showing literal imagery of a genital reassignment surgery to cause discomfort. So, I guess what I'm saying here is the likelihood of the creators just being shitty people is around probably about 100%, in my very unprofessional opinion. Unfortunately for Garrison, Mr. Garrison that is,
I think you're going to be very pleased with the progress, Miss Garrison. Mr. Garrison! Sorry, Mr. Garrison.
He lets the penis rat out of the box while trying to feel the penis. I don't want to get into it. And it escapes the lab, setting up the narrative of this episode for him, which is chasing his penis down. A trial of some kind to reclaim his manhood, literally and figuratively as far as he is concerned. The penis rat goes on the loose across the town of South Park, upsetting all kinds of women with its appearance to the annoyance of their male partners, which is a commentary on something, probably, I don't know. Women freak out around vermin? Women hate rats, which isn't true, because most people I know with pet rats are women. Garrison commits sexual assault in his attempt to capture his penis, which we just need to move past that as quickly as we possibly can. Gets the police involved, who make a silly sketch of Mickey Mouse with a bulging erection. We've got to keep moving here, okay? I'm sorry this seems like I'm speeding through it, but this video is already too long, frankly, and we can't stop here. And the penis rat finally stops to look at the moon and sing a little song about being lonely and seeking someone else, with accompaniment by the penis. Yet again. Please, 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 I beg you, don't make me stop here and explain anything. before it leaps down a sewer grate, and the cops tell Garrison that he just needs to learn to live as an ugly woman.
Sorry, Garrison, your penis is gone. I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do. You'll just have to live with being a woman, a very ugly one. Come on, men.
I think the safest option here for my sanity and for the brevity of this video is to just accept all of this as the face value absurdity that it is. To not bother diving into the meta commentary that might exist within this chase of the penis, because honestly, I don't think it has anything to do with trans people or transphobia in South Park, and so therefore, really when you think about it, exists outside of the purview of my investigation. That's the line that I'm going to tell my superiors anyway on the trans council, and that's just gonna have to satisfy you too, the viewer. I would say that I'm sorry, but I'm not really that sorry. We still have plenty of shit to go. Garrison regains his penis anyways, and gets reintroduced to the school as Mr. Garrison once more, with a little moral about how what they learned here is that they were a guy all along, because a woman is someone who can have kids and get pregnant, and if you can't do that, then you're a man.
I've learned that I've really been a dude all along. If you can't have babies, then you're a man.
To which another teacher interjects with the fact that his wife had ovarian cancer and so can't get pregnant, and Garrison responds with this.
Well then get an AIDS test, Thompson, cause your wife's a dude, faggot. Yeah, I'm back!
Kinda cementing the idea that Garrison is just a shitty person who is really obsessed with a strange version of hyper-Christianity that mixes with their homosexuality and homophobia, and maybe not a good person that we should rely upon for any sort of information, a fact that unfortunately doesn't always get through to the audience, who occasionally considers the shittiest characters on South Park as saying the terrible truths that everyone else is just too scared to bring up. You know, the terminally media illiterate, or South Park's main audience base of 15-year-old edgy teenage boys. The same kind who would idolise Patrick Bateman from Psycho, Tyler Durden from Fight Club, or Joker from Joker. Sort of missing the point from the toxic masculinity or capitalistic trauma of those characters and just going for the visual confirmation of how cool they look or how cool they act.
Look like you want to look, I fuck like you want to fuck, I am smart, capable, and most importantly, I'm free in all the ways that you are not.
With that episode, Garrison would go off to continue being a homophobic gay person, an eventual Trump allegory who hates and bombs Canada, with nary consideration nor mention for this whole trans-ish arc ever again. A strange narrative choice that was treated as a mistake, and corrected by the show after 4 seasons of being used as a trope. So what can we learn from this, before we head off into the wild blue yonder of the 2 later episodes about more recent and relevant trans issues? What is the takeaway for the audience here? Both South Park's and mine. Who the fuck knows, to be honest?
And it's gone.
What?
It's gone. It's all gone.
And I don't mean that to shirk any responsibility at having to have a conclusion. Trust me, if I could milk more words out of this, I would. But it's just that what Garrison represents is left vague enough that it's not very clear how I should approach it. They're not really trans representation, so I can't make any claim on that, but they do end up being the lens through which we view certain trans issues or trans realities, and the one that the audience would be able to contemplate that perspective from. However, Garrison is kind of blatantly terrible as a person, and not a reliable font of morality, or what the show would suggest should be reinforced as public ideas. But at the same time, Garrison occasionally gets put in the area that Cartman occupies of being the terrible person who is terribly right about certain social things that others feel too genial or too kind to openly say something about. Garrison's opinion about how womanhood is tied to biological function is reinforced in some way by the Doctor in the first episode, the supposedly detached voice of authority, who agrees with the idea that Garrison fucked up their body for nothing and will never be a real woman. Is that what the show means? And ultimately, all of this is gonna have to be explored further in that South Park satire and parody chapter. But the reason I want to do that separately and not scatter it amongst is because of how important that really is to every defense of South Park. How necessary it has been to ensuring that people can't criticize the show for how it reiterates stereotypes and uses the worst mockeries of minorities in the creation of comedy. How it turns open bigotry into laughs, and that all it does is diminish those issues for the majority audience who watches it. Ultimately, the fact is that Garrison was our only trans representation, our only view on trans issues or trans stuff for this entire period, was the eyes with which we saw and interpreted our community, and the fact that they were just a desperate, confused man who rushed into situations while barging their way to the front of other queer communities, like the lesbian one, and hyper-fixated on the notion of having sex in their body before detransitioning to a man once the giant mistake they made had sunk in more, is not a good thing when it has no counterpoints, when it has nothing to balance it out. The wacky, weird, strange, insane trans person is the only version of the community that South Park shows us for Garrison's tenure in that role. And that sucks. With that noted and wrapped up, it's time to move on to the trans episodes removed from this character, and also much later in time, 6 whole seasons later to be precise, with season 18's episode 3, The Cissy. I'll give you a clue that the only trans stuff that disengaged cis people care about in the USA for the past 10 years has been bathrooms and sports. So, you know, it's one of those two, and then the other episode is the other one, which is frankly a little disappointing. It really plays into the conservative fear-mongering that has made those issues the major center point of trans discussions, when we have far bigger and far greater problems that desperately need to be addressed, but get waylaid or pushed to the side for those concerns that at the end of the day don't really amount to much at all and are just a reiteration of the same bigotries that were used against black people back in the 60s when desegregation was happening, and against gay people in the 80s when they were fighting for their rights as well. Seriously, sports and bathrooms especially are a real sticking point for the white cis straight majority, huh? Or at least the media that tries to appeal to them. On with the episode before I get lost in more weeds.
I'm going down to South Park, gonna have myself a time.
Well, the animation has certainly progressed an awful lot from those earlier days. I wonder if the politics and the style of comedy has also become more developed with time, has managed to perhaps grow some complexity and depth. And yes, I am doing a bit here, okay? You know what the deal is. The writing is, well, it's actually literally on the wall. But the episode begins with the premise that this one is all about bathrooms. Specifically, Cartman getting annoyed that they can't have their toilet time. They can't go to a store bathroom to have a shit. And so they take it into their own hands to put a bow on their head and walk into the ladies' toilets, claiming that they are transgender.
This is the girls' bathroom! Alright, I need to tell you something, Wendy. I'm transgender. What?
And therefore are allowed to do this. Just to have a complete aside from the obvious problematic stuff in play here, The fact that this is just literally what conservatives think is happening and what the edgy teenagers who might be watching this believe is going on.
Transgenders want to use whatever bathroom they feel like, but some businesses and organizations complained and said they didn't want grown men next to little girls in public stalls.
Why do we keep getting saddled with the same kind of characters? The really, really shitty ones who make terrible points that some of the audience then takes to speak as some dark truth through their attempts to abuse or exploit a system. Seriously, why do trans people have this happen with the two characters who most do that? The girls have an obvious problem with this because it is very apparent that Cartman is not well intentioned in this claim. It's not actually transgender or identifying in any serious manner, and is merely using it for utility. But the school approaches this in the worst possible way. The principal claims that firstly, Cartman doesn't know what that means, which he does know what transgender means because he looked up a dictionary definition of it. And, oh, well, okay then, if he is a girl, then he needs to live like a girl, which means he also needs to be into boys.
Well, if you identify yourself as a girl, you must find yourself attracted to boys. Is that right?
Which Cartman responds to in the accurate way of how it has nothing to do with sexual attraction, which stumps the principal. Now, you could argue that this is merely a clear, evident sign of why education is important about this. Is a clear indicator of how little people in positions of power, like teachers, actually know about stuff that their students will deal with. However, that message might not even be close to what the takeaway from the scene is supposed to be, as the teachers go to Garrison asking what the hell Cartman is going on about with all this cisgender stuff that he's dropping, leading to this moment.
But then cisgender is just normal. Saying normal is extremely offensive to people who aren't in that group.
Now, yet again, we have the terrible character, the one who we are meant to see as being the shittiest person, saying what is ultimately kind of true and kind of correct. It is a bad thing to consider cisgender as normal. It implies that transgender people are not normal, are aberrations in some form, and is often used to justify harassment and bullying and ostracization. Same goes for any minority, to be honest. If you refer to being white as normal, that's not good. If you refer to being straight as normal, still not good. This is like a lesson in basic human decency, which is why it becomes such a struggle for certain people who really want to consider who they are as the normal baseline so that they can attack and mock others who are not normal. However, the show isn't using this normal conversation to show what you should do or to show a correct way of referring to people. What it's doing is reiterating the cancel-y culture attitude about how dangerous all these PC woke things are, because if you mess with them, you're going to get into some hot water, and so you better watch yourself and, well, just let those trans people get away with whatever they want.
But this isn't a hurting, confused child we're talking about. This is Eric Cartman.
Nobody else is gonna know that. You better just give him what he wants.
It's a silly thing to show because some people, especially those target demographics, consider this as being true. That trans people are almost in a position of power by virtue of being trans because of that capability. The bullshit capability to cancel people by existing. That, for some reason, doesn't seem to do anything to stop trans people from facing vast problems with job security, healthcare, housing, being disowned by their family, violently attacked, hate crimed, verbally assaulted, and denied access to the basic rights that everybody else seems to be able to get, but you can't get as a trans person. But South Park doesn't let the painful, heartbreaking truth stop them from making comedy that implies the exact fucking opposite, and attempts to punch upwards towards the trans community by portraying them as something powerful. I mean, it certainly hasn't let us stop them so far. There's also a B-plot in this episode, where a reporter is trying to discover the truth about something strange. The truth that Stan's father, Randy, is Lorde, New Zealand's singer and pop icon, who changed the landscape of music with her hit song, Royals. That isn't a unique take from me there, I just nicked it from Elle Hunt in the spin-off, who discusses how her style of slow, almost empty beats that included these very honest and grounded lyrics set a tone for the industry to copy and follow, that probably ended up leading to artists like Olivia Rodrigo and Billie Eilish. See, James Somerton? That's how you reference somebody else's view without plagiarizing it. Yes, I saw the H-Bomber guy and the Todd in the Shadow videos, alright. I'm only human after all. Look, don't put the blame on me, okay? Normally we ignore the B-plots for episodes, because they ain't got nothing to do with us. But I would like to occasionally dip my feet into this one, because there are elements of transness here to the idea of Randy. A man pretending to be a teenage female singer that presumably intertwine with the conversation around Cartman and pretending to be a girl to get into a bathroom. I'm sure I'll have a conclusion for that at the end of this chapter, so, check in on that one. Back to those girls' bathrooms anyway, and Cartman is pissing off all the ladies because he wants to use the toilet, and they don't want to be in the bathroom while he's in there, covering their faces because, frankly, Cartman eats terribly and presumably has very smelly shit, while Cartman taunts them from his position of assumed transgender power.
Not while you're in here! Oh my god, you guys are so cisgender. Sorry I'm different, but you can just suck my clit and my balls.
I swear I own a gun around here somewhere. And the girls make the point that there are people out there who are really suffering, who are really dealing with the issues that Cartman is making light of by using their struggle to gain something. Is South Park making a dig at itself here? I can't tell. But at its core, the fundamental flaw here is that while you can say, well, the episode isn't laughing at trans people, it's laughing at specifically Cartman, who is a terrible person, and therefore it's okay, the premise of that comedy is built upon the faulty notion of a cis boy using the trans agenda to infiltrate girls' bathrooms, which is exactly what a lot of fear-mongering and trans panic around bathroom bills relies upon. That same idea that because of the vagueness of transgender identity in the bills around it, and how there isn't like a gene or a test you need to pass to prove that you are really trans, that, well, anyone can claim to be transgender and they can get away with it. This using of conservative talking points in a way that makes them seem reasonable to the audience or something to be appropriately afraid of, while hiding it behind this satire that attempts to take a dig at everyone equally, ends up reinforcing those conservative points in the mind of the people watching, as something that is possibly totally fair and true to be concerned about, even though the amount of men who have pretended to be transgender specifically so they can get into women's bathrooms and do who knows what terrible shit is 0? I looked for like 20 minutes, and I could not find a single case outside of people like Steven Crowder or guys like him copying it to make a point that it could be done.
How can you tell me I'm not a transgender? No, you're not. Don't tell me I'm not a transgender, because I am a transgender.
In fact, if anything, what it brought up was how restricting bathroom access for trans students in schools led to them being victims of sexual assault or harassment, with a study reported on in the Harvard School of Public Health, putting that number at 36% compared to the population average of the high school students of 25.9. The lead author does say that this is not a definitive causation, more of an association, but it's still a worrying trend that politicizes these children and their ability to go to the bathroom in a way that makes them targets for both their peers and for adults. The principle, to get back to the fucking episode that I just cannot stay on track with, offers a solution to this problem that would hopefully satisfy all parties, telling Cartman that he can have his own bathroom, created for just him. I flat out refuse to use any updated pronouns because it is evidentially clear that this is not a real gender identity for Cartman, so fuck that shit and fuck him too. And Cartman accepts, while still using the language of actual concerns of trans people, to get the power to make changes to this bathroom, saying this in particular.
Of course, being forced into my own isolated bathroom will probably be somewhat traumatic for me. I might have to approve certain aspects of this solitary location.
This is all kinds of gross, for the exact same reasons that I've previously mentioned. Reasons that go beyond just how Cartman is bad person, and therefore bad person is not meant to be used as inspiration or moral lesson. Seriously, if you've been paying attention till this point, I shouldn't need to keep apologetically attempting to address criticisms, and yet I keep doing it anyway. It's like I have a serious problem with trying to appease everybody. On the side of this, the Lord plotline develops in a way that shows how Randy is basically being Lord because the executives are using the image of a 17-year-old girl to sell the records better, at least for them anyways.
What do you know about one of our artists, Lord?
17-year-old girl from New Zealand?
Wrong. She's a 45-year-old man living in Colorado.
That it's effectively the exploitation from the corporate side of a particular identity to further their own interests of getting as much money as possible, and selling Randy's records in a way that he would be unable to do as himself. We don't get told why Randy is doing it yet, but that'll come up later. And it reminds me of a mixture of how a lot of pop starlets don't write their own songs, or their songs are written by like 15 people, including a bunch of middle-aged men who are just writing as if they were a teenage girl. And also, in the far more modern context, it makes me think of the AI-generated musicians, like that famously dogged one right now, who adopt the persona and image of a young woman, and it's creepy as shit because you know that behind the mask is a bunch of tech bros who are abusing that to infiltrate the music industry.
Hello world, I'm Anna Indiana, an AI singer-songwriter, and this is my new song, The First Step. I hope you like it.
While it might get laughed off right now due to how blatant it is, I dread to imagine how many times in the future that stuff is just going to happen and we won't know. We won't know that the music kids are listening to and feeling for and identifying with the artist through is just AI-generated bullshit that never had a single human heart or emotion involved in it. Of course, those are the possible interpretations that I subjectively am building from this B-plot. A more direct one is tied into the current storyline of Cartman, which is about the male exploitation of womanhood. A not so great interpretation in the light of the fact that this is supposed to be a transgender or trans-adjacent episode, or I don't know, maybe it's nothing at all. It's just words said by characters to get a laugh out of someone, with no thought for what people might get from that or build into how they view the world and other people. Maybe it's just thoughtless comedy. You might already be able to guess what I'm about to say, but I'll cover that more in the chapter on satire. I'm gonna keep putting that off until I have to actually deal with it, and then I'm gonna be very sad about it. Cartman gets his new bathroom that's labelled Other and just has a picture of him on the door. And Stan is told how Cartman is neither a girl nor a boy, or anything you would understand.
Cartman's a girl now?
He's not a woman, he's not a man, he is something that you'll never understand, but he would die for me.
Trust me, the episode isn't going to actually bother going into anything non-binary related, because it's South Park. I don't think they even know it exists or care to talk about it, so we don't really need to consider that any deeper than the fact that it's a joke to be laughed at by the audience. In response to this though, Wendy, the feminist SJW girl of the bunch, decides to come in as also transgender, so that she can challenge Cartman over the trans bathroom and put a stop to his abuse of transgender identity.
Whoa. Well, wait, is that... Holy moly! Hey, what the fuck, dude?
It's like fighting fire with fire. But in this case, it's two cis children pretending to be trans to fight over a bathroom labelled other. A labelling that absolutely probably would feed school-based bullying, but yet again, not the point of the episode. The principal then drags both of them in, as this big fight breaks out where Cartman doesn't want a girl watching him poo. Though the principal says, well, if Cartman's a girl, then why would that be a problem? To which Cartman tells us that he's a guy who identifies as a girl, which is a different thing, and that he doesn't want to be watched by a girl who identifies as a guy.
No, I identify as a chick, but I'm still a boy. You can't make me share a bathroom with a girl that identifies herself as a fucking dude!
It's like the creators read about gender theory and the varieties of gender identity and just thought, well, this is some funny shit. I bet our audience would get a good old chuckle out of how crazy this all is, without bothering to really actually learn about gender theory and dig into its history and what it relates to. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't think anybody likes anybody watching them or hearing them shit. I mean, you know, dogs know all about that. Have you seen how shameful they look when they're going toilet and people are looking at them? They know. They know why it's wrong.
Yeah, but it's a shameful act that we all do in secret.
That's true. Even dogs know that. You ever see their eyes when they're doing it? They know.
Cartman then goes and harasses Stan, telling Stan that his girlfriend is telling everyone he's gay now, and he's to get that bitch on a leash. Not because Wendy is identifying as a boy though, but due to the fact that she is saying she is into girls, which makes Stan equivalent to a girl, I think, although I don't know if she's actually saying that, that's just Cartman saying that she's saying that, and therefore Stan's gay.
Oh yeah, she's got the whole school believing that she's attracted to girls, but she's dating you, so what does that make you, Stan? A girl!
Honestly, I don't remember any of that being said, and I think it's Cartman just making it up to try and make problems for other people, but this whole confusing, swirling mess of gender identity and sexuality is a nightmare to untangle through the lens of these characters. And that's the point. The point is that gender identity and sexuality are just too confusing for cis people, and especially cis kids to be able to understand. I mean, maybe that's the point. It's certainly something you could interpret if you in the audience felt like that's the message you wanted to take away from this. But like many of South Park's messages, it's not the clear message, and therefore it's not their fault if that's the shitty life lesson that you get from this episode and this scene. Stan then decides to go and talk to his dad about all this confusing gender stuff, to get Randy's interpretation on it as his father figure, though Randy is often the worst person to go to for any advice.
For what? Arresting me for what? I'm not allowed to stand up for myself? I thought this was America!
In this particular case though, due to Randy's whole pretending to be a teenage girl as another identity to sell records, he maybe actually has a little more to say on this whole gender thing than in other episodes, where he just kind of does the stupidest thing. Saying that out loud makes me realize how silly that idea is though. Like, Randy doesn't identify as a woman. He doesn't identify as any of that. He's merely being lured for his own purposes that we don't know yet, and because the record companies are using that costume to sell records. It shouldn't necessarily have any impact on his internalized sense of self at all. Stan asks questions about how people can identify as other things, how they can be other sexes without it being about their sexual orientation. And Randy answers by thinking it's about him and revealing that he is Lord, to the absolute confusion of Stan.
Yes, Stan. I am Lord.
What?
We also discover that Randy pretended to be Lord in the first place to also get into women's bathrooms, because he was sick of the men's bathroom stalls being occupied. Like, for him, it was never the record company and all that caused it. It was originally all Randy doing the exact same thing as Cartman, kind of. That's right. This episode is in fact a two cisgender men pretending to be women to get bathroom access episode, which is twice more than in real life. At the end of this big revelation of how Randy is teenage pop sensation Lord, Stan rather appropriately faints.
Stan?
The next day at school, Stan is standing in the hallway in front of the bathrooms and saying how he doesn't know where he belongs anymore. He doesn't know which bathroom he should go into. To which Butters says that, yeah, he just holds it in now instead of going. We have 6 minutes left for South Park to dig its way out of just being the most basic conservative interpretation of the bathroom discourse at this point. Seriously, we have had men pretending to be women to get into women's spaces and to get their own bathrooms made. That confusion leading to poor cis children getting lost and not knowing their gender anymore, both presented in a way that doesn't make it clear whether we're meant to be laughing at these points as being transgenderism going too far and being silly, or conservatives who talk about this going too far and being silly. I mean, at this current point, it definitely is far more on the mocking and satirizing trans people and the trans community side of things, not helped by never seeming to put an actual trans person into their fucking show. Like, seriously, all we get is cis people pretending. Great! Woohoo! But that uncertainty has always been South Park's big modus operandi, especially with their latest seasons, when they really tried to fence it and continue trying to argue that they are mocking everybody equally. My god, it's the second time I've said that statement. I'm sure I'm going to cover that at some point, probably the chapter on satire, ignoring the inherent flaws within that statement. And I've got to save it. I've got to save all that energy. Save that energy for that chapter, alright? Pushing it down the line. We jump over to the Lord side of things, where Randy as Lord is brought into the office with a disdainful looking woman, and told the females in the office have been pressuring management for a while now to create a new bathroom space for Lord, labelling it as an executive bathroom, to the horror of Randy as Lord, who feels safe in the woman's bathroom.
I like the women's bathroom. I feel safe there. Being able to use that bathroom is critical to my identity, to my music.
The woman makes it clear that Randy as Lord being in their bathroom makes the women feel unsafe though, as they don't want to share their bathroom with a man. Though she doesn't openly say it because of that whole hot potato thing. You know, you don't want to criticize trans people openly because then you'll get in trouble for being transphobic. And Randy as Lord leaves feeling depressed because of this. The show is juggling a lot of plates right now. A lot of plates that are really dependent on it having a good final message that stops them all from crashing into the ground and turning into shards of transphobic bigotry. And even without that, it is worth saying how yet again this scene plays into what conservatives believe to be true about trans women especially. That women really are not comfortable with them, do see them as men, and don't want them in their spaces, but feel like they cannot openly say it. I can see why people like Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder would appeal to these episodes as being about their points, because they are, and you can miss the satire. A lot is riding on these last couple of minutes right now. And Lorde goes radio silent, saying that she realizes that who she is makes people uncomfortable, and she will go back to being the old her instead. Cartman challenges Stan in the hall, and declares him to be intolerant for going into Cartman's bathroom, and that the school doesn't have a problem with trans students. It has a problem with cisgender people who are bigots, declaring them to be sissies. A pun on the fact that sissy is an existing word, and I believe probably a reference to the tranny word, like sissy is the cis person version of that. Cartman is, yet again, abusing the language and perceived cultural/social power that trans people possess in the minds of, well, in the minds of the creators of South Park and other right-wing or centre-right people like them.
Yeah! Stan's a big old fat sissy! Oh, come on, lay off him, guys. Oh, what are you, a sissy too, Clyde? No, just he is.
Which, as we have covered, we really don't have. Very often trans people are getting the consistent short end of the stick in almost every regard, and yet the hyper-focus of the media and of right-wingers is on those people who lose their jobs because they went on a transphobic tirade on social media, or on comedians who get in trouble because they won't stop making the same tired jokes about trans people. And yet those cancelled people keep coming back, don't they? They keep doing more specials, so how cancelled are they? Sharon then delivers a message to Lorde through Randy about how Lorde represents something different, and says this in particular.
I tell her not to let people change who she is. I tell her that if people are making fun of her, it's probably because they've lost touch with being human.
See, now this is the Hail Mary last quarter save that I was reckoning South Park was going to pull out. A lot of times when an episode has a bunch of really bad shit in it, you need to soften that blow with something good at the end, so you can feel like ultimately you did the right thing. Literally, the good moral music is playing, as Sharon says how people should be able to express who they are inside, and then when we stifle that, then we all lose. This inspires Randy as Lorde to make a new song. It's not actually Lorde singing this song, it's Sia, which is frankly just odd. Like, could they not get Lorde? I don't know, is that a commentary in itself? Fucked if I know. And as it plays, we see a montage of Stan staring at the bathrooms, of the woman who had a problem with Randy as Lorde stopping her boss from making a transgendered bathroom, the newspaper guy who was hunting down to find out who Lorde really was decides to delete the expose article that would, I guess, constitute outing Randy, I suppose? Sort of an outing article, maybe? And finally, the school decides to get rid of the transgender bathroom and allow any student to use whatever bathroom they feel most comfortable and safe with. Which upsets Cartman because he doesn't want to use bathrooms that anyone could be in, because then they would be crowded.
I don't want to use the girls' bathroom. If anyone can use it, it's going to be all crowded.
And the school declares that anyone who doesn't feel comfortable in a bathroom that might have a trans person in it can go use the sissy bathroom to keep them away from the normal people who don't care. And that's the episode.
Hey, where do you think you're going? To the bathroom? Oh, no, you don't. You gotta use the sissy bathroom. Well, go on, sissy.
So, you see, by the end, South Park ends up making the good point, reaching the conclusion that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia also ended up reaching too, actually. That it doesn't matter that people need to use bathrooms, and that unless you're a bigot, why would you care?
We'll have to use the special designated bathroom designed to keep them away from the normal people who don't care.
The build up to this, all those little points that got made, were in service of emphasizing this final narrative message that is in support of trans people, I guess? Is at least supportive of the fact that we should be allowed to go into bathrooms, and does point out how caring about that is stupid, though I suspect that caring thing might be a later future point that I'll have to make in, probably some chapter about the creators or the comedy, maybe. I have made a habit in this video of dogging on South Park. I think as a show it has a lot of problems and a lot of issues. They don't always get to the nuances of any situation, and quite often they present points in a light that makes them able to be interpreted by shitty people and bigots as being supportive of their ideas. In this conclusionary case, however, it is important to recognise that this is a positive statement on an issue that was getting blown up way out of proportion back when this episode released, and is still, frankly, getting blown up out of proportion to this very day. Am I happy that the episode was still through the lens of cis characters pretending to be trans for their own particular purposes? Am I okay with the central positive trans theme character being Randy pretending to be a girl to feel safe in the women's bathrooms? No, because that's not really a trans thing. But at the end of the day, none of this episode was really a trans thing. Sure, they had transgender labelled bathrooms, and they occasionally dropped lines about transgender people, and they referenced transgender people in passing, or as this distant concept that confuses and is used and exploited. But it was entirely a cisgender episode.
He was in there all the time. I finally got fed up. I pretended to be a woman. I called myself Lord.
You are not going to find representation in there. The best you can find is a commentary on the bathroom issue that at least comes down on the side of trans people. It doesn't really address that whole sex and gender and sexual orientation being confusing for children and making it hard for them to understand who they are bit that they brought up. But you know, it can't all be roses.
Oh, here he comes, everyone. It's the cis ginger. Think you can harass transgenders and use their bathroom?
But from that kind of positive trans-ish issue episode, we now move to one that I've heard a lot of bad things about, have seen much criticism online for, in regards to how it really doesn't centre itself in the reality of the situation, and instead ends up concluding with a message that does more harm to trans people than beneficial to anybody else. Season 23's episode 7, Bored Girls, which is about that other popular issue that dominates the trans narrative as crafted by cis media and cis people, while allowing them to ignore the stuff that's killing our community. Slowly, trans women in women's sports. God, it really does keep coming back to the same old tired shit, huh? And so often it's targeted at trans women, to the point that people willfully misinterpret situations to attack trans women. Like when trans men are forced to perform in women's sports because of these biology-based rulings, which leads to them dominating the sport, and then people repost it claiming that those trans men are trans women to further that narrative against all trans people. It's just non-stop getting screwed for everybody in that regards. A narrative that ultimately will not be satisfied until trans people are yeeted into their own segregated sporting events that can then have no funding. And, well, then at that point, trans people can just stop being able to do sports at all. Oh, well, what about all the times that trans women get kicked from women's events in sports wherein the argument of biology-based advantages, I'll talk about how bullshit that is down the line, doesn't even work, like chess or fishing. I mean, it becomes patently clear that it was never about fairness in sport, it was just about getting rid of trans people. Unless you're claiming that trans women can just fish better, or that men are naturally better at chess moves. I was about to keep ranting on this, and then I remembered that we haven't actually done the episode yet, so I will stop myself here. Let us actually review the episode, and then continue ranting afterwards. How does that sound as a deal? I think I'm trying to make a deal with myself here. Oh my god, I've been recording for so long. I've had to close the blinds because the sun has now moved into shooting into my eyes, and we've got the Nightlight songs. This is going to be a little bit more downplayed, a little bit more cool and close and vibey. I'm also going to take this off because I am boiling. Let's do this. So the episode begins with the new intro music thing that they do for all the episodes, featuring the PC babies, the children of PC Principal and Strong Woman, all characters that were introduced well after the stuff that we previously mentioned, and if I spent too long looking into their history, I would want to jump into the first Musk rocket to Mars, i.e. die. Effectively, it just means that you need to know this episode is a continuation of their move towards satirizing and mocking the new, younger generation of kids and adults who are considered by people to be snowflakes, easily offended by stuff that previous generations were not, and desiring safe spaces and trigger words. A criticism which often ignores the heart of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, the list goes on and on and on, of things that do just kinda get accepted as okay by those generations, and normal and fine to be expressed, that can make minorities feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. This shift away from South Park's earlier mockery of religious right-wing people to this generation snowflake, as it was popularized by Claire Fox in I Find That Offensive, who was a Marxist turned into a libertarian and then worked for Brexit before becoming a member of the House of Lords, even though she previously openly attacked that stupid British institution because some people get older and abandon all their political principles when they get offended by younger people criticizing them or what they believe in. Oh, wait, no, sorry. The offended people are the younger generation. The old people getting mad are just dropping the hard facts of life when they criticize or get annoyed by shit. There we go. I think I saved that one. I should still be able to get hired by the Daily Wire at some point when I detransition for money. But this shift in targeting was aligned in a similar manner with the way that libertarians ended up becoming absorbed into right-wing identity. Probably because a lot of them originally were centrists who stood on singular issues. And then when progressiveness happened, they found themselves moving further and further right, while the world slipped away from them. I don't know, probably something like that. I might get more into that on the chapter about Matt Stone and Trey Parker, to be honest. For now, after those intro credits run, we get introduced to our main characters for the trans storyline, PC Principal and Strong Woman, who are not trans characters and are not more complex than their names. As Strong Woman is training for a competition. He's a principal who's PC, she's a woman that's a strong feminist, yada yada. It's literally the names.
I would like to open this door for you, however I understand the gender-based biases that this could imply.
Why do you need to open the door?
I don't need to open the door.
Oh, and the babies cry about Mulan because it doesn't actually feature trans issues, rather just having a woman identify as a man, which, okay, has anybody actually complained about that? I tried to find an example that they were tying to here, but it just seems like this is a hyperbolic thing where they hyperbolically satirize a position nobody is taking, but the audience looks at it and goes, oh, well, you just know that's the kind of thing that those people would say, right? You know, that's exactly what they would get upset by. Honestly, most trans people I know find Mulan to be one of those nostalgic films, where despite its lack of serious commitment to trans representation, it still gets adopted as being relative to our struggles in a positive gender binary defying light. I mean, I'm sure somebody out there probably has something to say about Mulan that is negative, and you know what? Maybe they're right. I don't know, everything deserves some criticism, nobody's nerfect. This jumps into our next scene, which is in the school hall, where the principal and vice principal, PC Principal and Strong Woman, give a relatively basic speech about not letting gender hold you back from doing things. things. Like, I get that the comedy here is meant to be, ooh, the language policing, and ooh, this is supposed to be inspiring, but is it really inspiring, or is it just more of that woke buzzword stuff? Yeah, I just don't think I care about seeing this speech in a negative or comedic light.
We've really come a long way breaking down gender binary bigotry, and I hope I can especially inspire some of my girl students here.
Like, seriously, is this actually that bad? That they talk about how the vice principal is going to a strong woman competition? That she thinks it will hopefully help girls see that they can also be strong and not have to deny their femininity? And that inspiration can also apply to trans students as well. Yeah, it's probably a little bit tacky, maybe a bit overplayed, but how is that different from a regular school hall speech from any principal? At the strong woman competition, strong woman gets her ass kicked, and so do all the other women by a trans woman, even though they talk about how happy they are to have a trans woman be involved in the competition. Secretly, they kinda are not okay with it because of those biological advantages. Specifically, that this is a trans woman who identifies as a woman but isn't taking any HRT or anything like that. So basically looks like Randy Savage.
And is it correct you just started identifying as female 2 weeks ago? I'm not here to talk about my transition.
In this way, within the episode, we find the moralizing SJW woke women up against their beliefs when it comes to kick them in the ass. Oh, they're okay with trans women, are they? Well, what about when a trans woman is exploiting the system to win and make real women feel bad, physically and emotionally? What about then? Do your beliefs hold up then? Women who are allies?
Any words for the challenger, Miss Woman?
Good luck, Heather.
Luck is for dudes.
Hold the responses from me and you. Hold them deep inside. We need to let this episode play at least somewhat longer before I tear into it, okay? The show plays this up and attempts to still be supportive of trans people by showing Heather Swanson, the trans woman in question, as not being your regular trans athlete. That Heather just started identifying as female 2 weeks ago, and that she seems very clearly obsessed with the ability to crush and destroy women.
Now that I can compete as female, I'm ready to smash the other girls. I am the strongest woman this state has ever seen.
Now, you see the smart move that South Park is playing here. A very similar move to the bathroom thing, and a similar move to what happens in real life when liberals or libertarians adopt the anti-trans rhetoric or are lured in by it. They're not attacking your regular trans people. You know, they're not attacking the normal ones, whatever the fuck that means. They're instead talking about these hypothetical bad trans people. Or these bad people who exploit the trans community and the changes that we're making to let the trans community feel more welcome to get some kind of advantage. This isn't about getting rid of trans people from sports. It's about making sure that it isn't used by men pretending to be trans women to get into sports. And yet, these arguments are, like I mentioned at the start, being used specifically to get rid of trans women from all sports, even sporting events like chess. It's getting rid of trans women who passed previously established bars of restrictions, you know, stuff like needing to be on hormones for a number of years, as well as proving low levels of testosterone at a level lower than the average cis women have. So the question becomes, why are we focusing on these hypothetical people that don't seem to really exist? Why are we not talking more about this being an obvious cover for conservatives wanting to erase trans people from public events? I mean, Daily Wire, my potential future employer, literally copied this when they made their feature-length film Lady Ballers, a comedy film, comedy being in some pretty extreme quotation marks right there, because they wanted to make a documentary, according to Ben Shapiro, yet could find no examples in real life to back up making that documentary, so they just turned it into a fictional story instead.
Yes. I originally went to them and I said, you guys should go try out for a bunch of ladies' leagues. And that became not possible because, as it turns out, most ladies' leagues don't allow in actual men.
Ah, yes. A classic. If reality doesn't align with your beliefs and what you think is true, then just make shit up until it does. And before people have a go at me in the comments, let's talk about the one example that made the rounds briefly. Let's do my due diligence here, which is Avi Silverberg, a man who self-identified as female to enter a weightlifting competition and beat all the women, including the previous record holder, who was a trans woman. Now, this was all reported on by Icons, a group who, well, firstly a group who referred to the trans woman that held the record previously as a trans-identifying male, so fuck them first and foremost. That's just a term that you use because you want to deny somebody their gender identity, and you're too cowardly to just call them a tranny, you know? I mean, you might as well just say that. It's what you're already saying, for the love of God. At least be honest with your intentions. And this spread all over the internet through right-wing media and tabloid media, because, well, I mean, obviously bread and butter culture war stuff that gets clicks. That's the main reason why a lot of them do anything. And from what I can tell, digging into it, this did happen and was part of a new ruling that the Powerlifting Association in Canada put in. But when I was digging into this to see if it was true first and foremost, I dug further into the records and it got me stuck down a rabbit hole of stuff about Ann Andres, the trans woman at the centre of this debate. Because while she has won a bunch of competitions in local and regional levels, she is still not number one in almost any rankings. And the rankings on the powerlifting site itself are also not gender specific anyways. They do list gender on there, but what I found was that at a Western Canada level, the top bench press athletes are a woman, Rhea Stinn, and a man, Delano J. Woodbine. Is bench pressing easier for women somehow, or do men just not bother doing it, or bother training specifically for it? I don't know, but regardless, Ann Andres is not top ranked in any of the categories. She won a few competitions, sure, and you could argue that having an open self-ID with no restriction on it for a competition does allow for people who might have testosterone-based advantages to succeed in sports. But here is the thing. No other men are using that, except for the one guy who tried to make a point out of it, which turns this all of a sudden into not an easy yes or no situation, from, admittedly, my literally not a doctor or a sportologist perspective. Aside from the criticism one might have of blocking off sports for trans people where testosterone plays zero role in determining capability, aside from the fact that some cis women who have high levels of testosterone got banned from sporting events, like Caster Semenya, which is frankly bullshit, because if we're banning her, why are we not banning Michael Phelps? Dude has literal biological advantages for swimming, more than your average man does, so why does he get to keep all of his medals and keep being able to compete? Well, he's not going to anymore because he's too old, but you get what I mean. Is it because he's a white dude and not a black woman? I'm not saying that's what it is, but it's weird that these testosterone rulings do seem to keep targeting black women to ban them and take their medals back from. And aside from the many trans athletes who perform mediocre or do well because they trained hard, and it seems silly that we have to just not recognize that and strip it away from them by attributing it all to natural advantages that might not even be present or valid to be concerned about or to attribute it to. Aside from all of those very important points in the discussion and necessary things to consider here, what's the proposed solution? Kicking trans women entirely out of women's sports and forcing them to compete in their own invented category of trans? That's not a real solution to the issue. Firstly, it's just a fantastic way to gut all funding and attention for those trans athletes by isolating and segregating them, a la what sort of happened to the National Coloured Baseball League in 1887. It also leads into more questions, like, do athletes such as Caster Semenya have to perform in the trans league, even though they are not trans? Do trans men and trans women have to compete with one another? And in that case, are we saying that the biological advantage of being a trans woman is the same as the artificial advantage of a trans man? Is that what the argument means? Does every single competition at every single level have to make a trans version, or, far more likely, will all of this just mean excluding trans people from sports entirely? Ultimately, it's not a real solution because of those facets, and it only works if you don't care about trans athletes at all and just want them gone. Oh, hello, icons. I didn't see you come up. Where'd you come from? What were we talking about? That's right, a South Park episode. Shit, I did so well at keeping that rant inside me for like 5 minutes of the episode, but it was a losing battle. At least it's done now though, and we can watch the rest of this South Park thing and see exactly how they follow the conservative and anti-trans playbook in the points that they make with this Heather Swanson trans character. Yeah, it's a lot of women getting completely destroyed by the Randy Savage character because, you know, women are weak and can never stand a chance against men in any physical sport at all, which isn't exactly true, but it's a line that we keep reiterating enough that people just believe it. We get to watch as the crowd becomes more and more bored / horrified to see this obvious dude enjoying beating the living shit out of women and demeaning them. A hyperbolic representation of the imaginary men hiding within the trans movement because... Actually, yeah, hold up a second. I did that whole spiel about that cis man going in and proving why these new pro-trans rulings are bullshit. But that was a cis man. Like, yeah, I guess cis men should not be performing in women's sports. Like how cis men should not be going into women's spaces. Because they're not women, they're cis men. But that's not what the argument of the pro-trans movement is. Nobody in that side is saying that cis men should be allowed to do that. Some people are arguing we should involve gender barriers entirely, but that's a separate conversation I won't be having. It's odd when I think about it more that people treat it like it proved a point. Like, look, this cis man came in and dominated women's sports using a loophole in the system that allowed trans women to compete. Therefore, we should ban all trans women. I guess I just don't see the logical steps and connection between that original point and that conclusion. Unless you already wanted to ban trans women, you already were here, and you're just looking for whatever justifications it will take to successfully pull that off. Because whenever you look into the trans women who are fear-mongered about in these competitions, what you find is that they are never beating all the women, right? There are always cis women ahead of them at regional, national and international levels. Leah Thomas did really good over the course of 3 years, but still didn't finish in the number 1 place this year. She was still below cis women in the competitions, and that was after years of training and effort. Laurel Hubbard, the trans weightlifter who everyone made a huge problem about because she was the first openly trans person to compete in the Olympics, finished last in her group at the Olympics. A fact that was curiously absent from all the discussions about her participation. And I'm not doing this to glorify trans women failing or not being number 1. The problem is that people are hyperfixating on this biological advantage and using it to make some argument that sports should be fair. But as Emily Bridges says in Vogue, sports is inherently unfair. That's why there are winners and losers. All athletes have different levels of endurance and physical fitness. There are other barriers too, like elitism, monetary investment, and time investment that all play a part. I keep getting stuck on this and keep bringing it up because this is such a simple thing to make a huge problem out of, and it requires such a multifaceted response and answer to successfully make sure that people don't look at the easy hypothetical that conservatives raise and go, well, yeah, actually, that sort of makes sense. Men are stronger than women, and trans women are basically just men as far as I, the audience in this regards, am concerned. And so, yeah, we should kick them out of there. And I really fear that people will walk away from my video thinking that trans women don't belong in sports. And I want to do my absolute best to make it so that isn't the case, or at least to do as little damage as possible. It's so much easier to bring up a hypothetical situation that isn't really happening, or is not a big problem, and to make that thing the thing people talk about, than it is to deal with the realities of the complex and nuanced situation which does not have the easy answer of kick trans women out of sport. And it's that same hypothetical that's always used to fearmonger and attack trans people, whether it's in bathrooms or sports or any other space. The episode continues with PC Principal and Strong Woman trying their best to not address this obvious issue that they have, because it would upset their PC babies, even though they are obviously unsure or upset with what's happened in this competition.
I guess she just started identifying as a woman a few weeks ago. Doesn't really seem fair.
Just don't!
Part of that continuing narrative from the earlier episodes about how trans people have a lot of power because people will get cancelled or attacked for criticising anything related to us. Later on, Heather Swanson turns up to tell Strong Woman that she hopes there are no hard feelings about Swanson winning the competition, and it seems like this is mostly just a way of rubbing it in Strong Woman's face. Like using the Randy Savage persona to act in a wrestling way, as well as boasting about their strength in front of the PC babies, and to call PC Principal a transphobe for calling Swanson out for being a bad sport.
Don't you dare! I'm trans people's biggest supporter! What I think you are is a terrible sport! Transphobe, you better knock it off!
This is just all kinds of distasteful. And I'm sure the long-term resolution will be probably PC Principal realizing that you can't be woke all the times. And sometimes you do just have to restrict things, and you keep them from trans people, because it's a slippery slope. If you give them too much power, too much freedom, too much control, who knows what will happen? That's my bet anyways about the episode. Heather Swanson then gets to appear on a Woman in Sports show, talking about how she has won every kind of tournament and competition for women ever, taking all the prizes. Yet again, a hyperbolic interpretation that we've already mentioned is not even close to 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 the truth, but it doesn't matter because they're making a point. But I am sure that the totally cool South Park audience will absolutely remember that this is a hyperbolic point that's getting made when they watch this episode, and not just come away thinking that maybe the Conservatives have a point on this one, and that it is in fact okay to do a little segregation of trans people out of society. From Heather Swanson calling out Strong Woman specifically on this show, we discover from Strong Woman that she knows Swanson, that Swanson is Strong Woman's ex-boyfriend, who was a complete asshole and who is using this whole transgender identification thing to just attack women.
He hates women. She hates women. When I left him, he felt like he got beat by a girl.
While the two woke protagonists realise that Swanson doesn't care about trans people or women or about gender identity, and is merely using this as a tool for revenge. To the shock of PC Principal, who can't believe that people like that exist. There's that point. There's that point building. You see the point being made? It's the one we've done earlier. Trans women are fine. Trans people are fine. But there are evil, monstrous people out there who will use and exploit these communities for the purpose of doing horrible things. And so we unfortunately have to kinda just hit all trans people to make sure those monstrous people never get the chance. That is the element behind a lot of the bathroom arguments, and behind some of the sports arguments, and behind the trans healthcare argument. It's always about the possible maybe people who could abuse that change, rather than the real, actual people who would benefit from those changes. It keeps being these same scenes and the same reiterations over and over again from Swanson in the sports. And then PC Principal jumps onto that sports show in front of everyone and openly says that Swanson was obviously gonna beat all the women because they had the advantage of male puberty, giving them a completely different body.
Best since identifying as a woman. Yeah, no shit, because you went through puberty as a male, so your body's completely different.
This is the conclusion that we're heading for. This conclusion that even the woke people end up realizing trans women are not like cis women. That they do need to be determined and defined by the childhood they had no control over for the rest of their lives. No matter what they might do or go through or prove by jumping through hoops to us that they might be closer to real women. There's also this funny shot where the principal is being all sad in the park after having this moment in public, after pushing Swanson over and them doing a wrestling dive to make it look like they took more damage than they really did to make Principal look like a transphobe, where Principal looks at his phone and the headline is South Park has a problem with trans people. And honestly, yeah, no shit. The biggest one being that we can't seem to get an actual fucking trans person on the fucking show. Seriously, count it. Count it. Garrison, gay guy who got sucked in by a trend, learned that he couldn't get pregnant, infiltrated spaces, and then got out as soon as he could grow his dick back. Randy, pretending to be a woman to use the female's bathroom where he feels safe singing as Lord. Cartman, pretending to be a woman to use female bathrooms as well because he hated shared bathrooms. And finally, Swanson, a dude pretending to be a woman to get back at his ex and to beat up women because he hates them. Oh, and I guess there is also technically the brief inclusion of Caitlyn Jenner, who is mentioned in Stunning But Brave through the PC bros defending her trans hero status violently, that whole cancel culture joke shtick really cementing itself there, and then goes on to become Garrison's running mate during his Trump phase presidency stuff, with the main jokes around Caitlyn Jenner being that she looks fucked up, has a masculine body, and runs people over. Also, not voiced by Caitlyn Jenner, obviously, they cannot get her, so it's just probably one of the dudes doing it. It's on the screen right now who voiced her, so there you go. That's it. That's what we got as trans representation for the trans episodes. Everything else aside, that's a pretty major fucking problem. And I don't think it's cause they're such big cowards that they're too scared to actually include a trans person in their episodes. I don't think South Park are such huge, monumental babies to be afraid of the risk of being wrong, because the rest of their careers in writing South Park would definitely disagree with that assessment. And before you get on me, you can check the chapters, trust me, I am going to mention Princess Kenny, I am going to mention Marjorine, but here's the facts, those don't count either. They don't count any more than me looking at Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and calling it possibly a trans nostalgia episode if you're looking to headcanon your representation counts as a trans representation. Making it up from things that aren't confirmed is not exactly the same thing as actually having it. So yeah, South Park does have a problem with trans people, alright? That's a correct headline. The episode wraps up with PC Principal going back home after being afraid that his kids would judge him because they taught them to see no grey areas in acceptance. So, in response to that, he tries to make good with Heather Swanson, to come and do a public speaking at the school for them, which goes about as well as you could imagine.
Oh my god.
Big, bulging dicks and small, tight leather pants, the mocking of PC Principal to his face behind the protection of being trans, while also talking more about loving beating women up. Until he gets challenged by the girls at board games, and then gets his ass kicked in the board games and the mind games.
You just got beat by the board girls. Do you think that's fair?
Oh, sorry, I'm out here misgendering Swanson. Fuck you. Swanson then gets mad at the girls, because they have an unfair advantage over him, due to the fact that he grew up as a boy and girls grew up as girls, and that makes them better at board games because they spend more time reading the rules. is this what the point is? That women are biologically better at some hobbies or competitions too, and that everyone is gender biologically better in some ways, and so we should account for that, or we shouldn't care about that? I have no idea what the conclusion of this narrative is supposed to speak to, really. But it turns out that the PC babies don't give a shit about the Swanson stuff. They don't care, and according to their parents, they must see the nuances of the situation. That raising the gender-based issue of strength doesn't make one a bigot or a bully. That these PC babies, those snowflakes, are finally waking up and growing up.
All this time we were worried what the PC babies would think.
And we didn't realize that our little babies are growing up.
That's the more definitive moral of the story. You can tell yet again because it's said with the good moral music they use as coding for that. And here is the issue. An issue that I've kinda already illustrated throughout my little rants in the course of this episode. Raising the gender-based issue of strength is a problem, not because it makes you a bigot or a bully, it's because it isn't necessarily true to the realities of the situation with trans women. It doesn't offer an actual or realistic solution to the problem outside of full-on segregation. It condones and reinforces attitudes that seek to push not just trans women out of sports, but also cis women who have different bodies or genetic components when others are allowed to continue competing for some vague reason, and it gives spaces for bigotries and bullying to exist under the guise of just what the science says, without actually bothering to refer to the science or the studies in a meaningful way. Yeah, this is a complex topic, but episodes like what South Park has here are not helping the complexity. They are going with the dumbed down version that conservatives want to be used because it most serves their main interest of getting rid of trans people. They're helping to do the work there to dumb down this conversation by taking it out of the hands of people where it really matters and putting it into the public sphere. It is so hot. Not helped, I imagine, by me getting continually angry if I sound distant, because my mic is being put down, and that's how sound works. Just gonna have to roll up my sleeves if you don't mind me. Ooh, look, I'm ready to fight somebody, which I am in only the metaphorical, cultural sense with South Park. Anyway, now it's time to talk about the side stuff. Those are the main episodes all covered, and now I want to just touch upon the stuff that will undeniably get mentioned in the comments if I don't. Admittedly, they probably still will be mentioned in the comments, but at least I can feel smarmy for the fact that I know I said something about them. Let's start with Princess Kenny in the Black Friday series, which also carried over into the RPG games that got made, the Stick of Truth and Fractured But Whole. Those games also featured the option to have your protagonists be non-binary, or to select being a transgender girl or cisgender girl.
Do you identify as being cisgendered or transgendered?
Well, if it ain't a transgendered girl.
There we go. I basically covered what the games have to offer towards this conversation. I don't think I want to say much more, and also honestly, I couldn't be fucked playing them, and wanted to keep this about the show. I'm in charge of this ride, and you have no power to make me pick the destinations whatsoever. The Princess Kenny stuff is centered entirely upon the fact that for the Black Friday arc of the show, the arc where they did a parody of Game of Thrones mixed with the American Black Friday holiday sales season, well, during that arc, Kenny calls herself Princess Kenny, and wants to be referred to as a chick.
All hail the princess! The princess!
Because Kenny also has a lot of power in the Game of Thrones allegory they're doing, and at some point, I think Kenny also gets kawaii princess powers down the line too.
Oh?
It doesn't really serve a transgender narrative or illustrate any transgender issues because none of it is meant to be a transgender moment. It's just Kenny being a princess now, and that's the funny of it. No further explanation given. Kenny reverts back to regular Kenny afterwards, and there are no long-term changes or ramifications within the show from that event. So it's hard to see it as more than just something that happened for undetermined funny comedy reasons. The Marjorine Butters thing is a little bit more interesting to our conversation about trans stuff here, being the centre point of the episode Marjorine in Season 9, where Butters has to go undercover as a girl to infiltrate a sleepover and find the girl's magical fortune-telling device, faking his death to enact this persona.
Oh my God, Butters! Oh, Hannah. Just keep stalling, Butters. We don't have the dead pig quite ready yet.
During the course of the episode, Butters is initially treated with hostility by the girls, before he cries and then gets comforted and welcomed into their circle. As Marjorine, he starts to have fun with the girls, and enjoy doing social activities with them, being treated with far more respect than the boys ever did. Before the episode goes off a bender, and he has to escape with a device, and then gets locked up by his parents because they think he's a zombie, and then it gets fed like salespeople.
There you go, son. Eat.
Can't I just have some SpaghettiOs?
While there is certainly something in that scene of Butters being welcomed as a girl by the other girls at the slumber party, and getting to participate in their feminine activities that would trigger some kind of recognition or connection from young trans women watching the show, and might serve to make it a nostalgic scene for them, it yet again isn't intended to be a trans episode. Its intention is far more to play into the fact that Butters is often a semi-willing tool used by the far more dominant boys to do these shenanigans with very little respect given or serious friendship offered. In contrast to what he briefly discovers with the girls here, it's more of a commentary on the character of Butters, and how he rarely gets that kindness. I mean, here's the thing. Other trans people are allowed to interpret whatever media they want as trans. If you want to claim Princess Kenny or claim Marjorine, you're totally allowed to do that. I can't stop you. Matt Stone and Trey Parker certainly cannot stop you. Knock yourself out. But in the long efforts that I am doing here to make this an exploration of trans episodes and characters in South Park, these don't really have a strong or meaningful enough place to earn more than these mentions within this side chapter. With that said, I want to finally get into something that I've been putting off for a while now, because it's going to be a difficult chapter that relies upon a lot of subjective opinions and interpretation, so ultimately no doubt controversial as far as statements go, which is the place that South Park has as comedy. How that satirical nature of it plays into the discussion that we need to have about trans people being in it, and perhaps also some analysis that will diffuse or debunk the defences that fans of the show who don't like criticism will bring out. So with that noted, what is satire? Webster's dictionary... No, I'm joking, I wouldn't do that to you. Satire is often considered to be a form of comedy that relies upon the embodiment of the attitudes, traits, beliefs, and persona of the target group, with the intention of showcasing their inherent flaws or stupidity by mimicry and exaggeration. A clear and obvious example that a lot of Americans might be familiar with is that of Stephen Colbert's spin-off show, The Colbert Report, which featured the noted liberal progressive Colbert acting as a Fox News or Bill O'Reilly style host/news anchor, saying and doing things that aligned with a comedic left-leaning view of those right-wing outlets.
This is Who's Attacking Me Now?
The joke was in the knowledge as an audience member that you were in on it, that you were aware this was meant to be sardonic, a vicious mockery if you will. And within that you see the interesting element of satire, the idea of an in-group. Without a clear defined in-group, nobody would be able to clock the satire and to understand its target. so it would seem almost identical to the groups that it is trying to make fun of. But the purpose of satire is not just in this tribalistic form of comedy. It also serves as a form of political messaging, through the way that it can expose or deliver judgment upon the group that it is satirizing. Which brings us to the very famous historical example of this from Jonathan Swift in A Modest Proposal, wherein the advocacy by Swift that the Irish people suffering from starvation and poverty under the rule of the British because of their religious affiliations should sell their children as food for the nobility, a point stretched out over many pages that commended the value of a child for food, and how this sale would both bring wealth to the economically fucked Irish poor, as well as remove a drain on that wealth from them. This was a commentary on the way that the rich English landowners / nobility were effectively feasting upon the Irish people during the occupation, and showed no remorse or care for their living standards. It was saying that the English totally would buy and eat Irish children if there was a good enough reason for it, because they didn't view the Irish people as people. There are many forms of satire that I could discuss here, but I won't, because ultimately all I'm trying to get across is that this is the world of comedy that South Park is ascribed to, and these are the kinds of things that satire is predominantly used for. So, does South Park do this satire well? Well, that's a rather subjective issue, because you kinda have to break it down into parts. Like, the comedy part is almost entirely up to the person involved. Some people love to laugh at very basic jokes involving people's bodies or bodily habits like shitting or the hyperbolic mockery of trans identities for the purpose of making them seem like freaks, and it's not my job to say that that isn't comedy.
Hot, 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 hot.
I can think it's bad comedy that relies not upon making an interesting observation or telling a humorous story, but rather upon the pre-existing bigotries and prejudices that are reinforced to assure that audience that they are normal, because at least they are not those people that they're collectively laughing at. But realistically, whether it's funny or not is irrelevant. It's not the point that I, nor many trans people, really have an issue with when it comes to these kinds of jokes. At the end of the day, the real problem is the long-term ramifications of the normalization of the ideas and concepts which go into that form of humour. Which brings us to the argument that will often get tossed out by fans of South Park when you move around to criticising this, which is how South Park hits everybody. It targets everyone equally, baby. Guns blazing, loose cannon, libertarian flag flying, as it takes pot shots no matter what group you belong to. No matter how powerful and controlling you might be, or victimized, demonized, beat down and outcast you are. Hey ya, that might be the problem. Because this is where the flaw with equally treating people the same really comes into play. It's fine to treat everybody the same if you're just some regular Joe with no real power in society or culture or government or business or wherever. But for those places where they do have a large swaying impact, not everyone is equal. Many people are worse off than others, due to historical and cultural factors that have led to them being in a place that doesn't let them have the same lives as others. This does relate quite a bit to our South Park conversation here, because when South Park satirizes trans people and the trans community, when it uses the most hyperbolic stereotypes others that exist to make points about issues that are often already clouded with misinformation designed to strip us of rights/access, what South Park is doing is helping to maintain that systemic bigotry, is playing its part in keeping the status quo alive and well in the mind of its audience. This isn't even getting into the fact that due to the centrist nature of South Park's satire, due to that mockery of everyone equally all the time, It allows for the worst people to watch these episodes, the people who don't have any problems with it because they're already on top, and empathise with the worst morals from it and claim it for themselves, with no real pushback from the creators or from the show, especially with the recent spin towards more right-leaning content within South Park, more anti-woke or anti-SJW stuff. That thing is becoming quite rabid.
I had a dream that I was replaced by a diverse woman.
I've told you there's no such thing as Disney executives who replace everyone you love with diverse women who complain about the patriarchy.
But regardless of that, the targeting of trans people at all as a point of satire is strange, because you see South Park doing that weird thing that they kept doing, where they kept having to make it seem as if trans people have this social power, or have the world by the balls with cancel culture, so they can justify the satire they're doing as punching up at the trans community, while completely ignoring the massive raging issues that exist to fuck trans people over at every single possible point and would indicate that they're not a privileged group? Seriously. Look back at my episode reviews, and you see that running thread, that running theme that does put the trans characters or trans mimicking characters into a position of strength because of their trans identity.
So Eric Cartman just has us in some kind of bathroom checkmate?
Actually, it's more like a royal flush.
It treats them as some kind of ruling class, because the form of satire South Park is using sort of relies upon the group being that. The point I'm trying to get across here is that South Park is quite often doing its satire around trans people in a way that obscures the truth, or obscures the issues they face, in favour of painting the community as one in a light which opens it up for the mocking scrutiny that they employ. And that while South Park is not education, it's entertainment, it doesn't intend to be something you should learn from. By the power of Grayskull! No, wait, hang on. By the power of people having their opinions reinforced through popular culture and finding human connection through character and developing political identities through this kind of satire. That's too long of a statement. Grayskull was way easier. South Park ends up having an influence. A capital I influence at that. Recognizing this is not automatically an indication of whether something is good or bad, but it is essential towards us being able to even have the initial conversation of why criticizing South Park's representation and story arcs matters. It does matter, for the reasons I listed in this chapter. Were you paying attention? Come on. And finally, for the final, very brief chapter before I have to do some sort of bloody conclusion, I decided to do something that I wanted to figure out myself, which was what Trey Parker and Matt Stone believe. Whether they've said what the stated targets of their comedy are meant to be, given some sort of context or clues towards that might paint this as less malicious and more poorly planned transphobia and bigotry that we've noticed in their episodes. So I read a bunch of interviews from them. A lot of interviews. And frankly, there wasn't much at all specifically about trans people, beyond them just saying how they like to do episodes on whatever is popular at the time they're creating those episodes, the zeitgeist tap that they use to stay relevant, and that it's all meant to expose all sides of the debates in their flaws and failures.
You dropped anything because even you decided it was too offensive?
No. I don't know. We always try to find a way, if it's funny, to make it work.
Aside from that, the major political thing that came through from their libertarian leanings, a well-documented facet of their beliefs, is that A, people should just not care about stuff, and the world would be a better place if everyone just stopped caring so much. And B, that freedom of speech, in all forms, is a very important and fundamental aspect of creativity and society. Matt Stone weighed in on the Dave Chappelle Netflix special situation, wherein Dave had a pretty transphobic bit in his comedy, something that is explored better by both FD Signifier and Jesse Gender in their videos, so, I don't know, go watch those videos as well if you haven't done that already, you know? Check them out. And Netflix refused to take down the special, or to cancel his contract, or to do any kind of pushback that would perhaps commit towards creating a site that doesn't openly let transphobic shit get posted on it. Probably because of how valuable Dave Chappelle is to them. Like, he makes multi-millions of dollars. Trans people can't compete with that kind of shit. We don't make any money at all. I'm worth like $20 to YouTube. And Matt Stone supported this in comments about it, emphasizing how this all made Netflix look a lot better in his eyes, and in the eyes of the vague reference that he made to creative Hollywood. Like, he doesn't give any real names or stats or like numbers or anything, but just says that he has a feeling that most of the creators in Hollywood supported Netflix's choice there. This not caring and freedom of speech are both fundamental aspects to understand about Trey Parker and Matt Stone though, because they do really shape why they have taken such a strong stance against the PC baby woke crowd in more recent seasons of South Park. And by proxy, why they're taking potshots at the minorities like trans people that are the subject of those debates. Not caring, just letting people say or do whatever they want without making a big deal about it. Not restricting the speech of people by using that old cancel culture, whatever the fuck that thing means, because it's more just this vague deity that conservatives appeal to when anybody gets criticised or any pushback for their stated views or beliefs at all. They're just more often bigoted shit they're saying. Like, you're like, oh, we must pray to the cancel culture so it won't destroy us for saying that, you know, black people shouldn't be kneeling or some shit.
Players, black and white, should be fired for it, but the players run the team these days, and that's sad.
All of this is stuff that a lot of trans activists are engaged in, that the trans community itself is openly critical of, and repeatedly pointing out as part of the issues that cause our lives to be harder. That people not caring when someone says something offensive about us. That politicians or comedians or anyone with power expressing those views does make their places of work or places they control more unsafe. Does give license to terrible people to do terrible things towards trans people. And all the things that the trans community and trans activists are bringing up as problems are things that are frankly no different to the same problems that women or gay people or black people or any other minority has also raised as issues in the past. And honestly, those people also kind of got equally mocked for being upset with that stuff. But all of these people caring about stuff, it's antithetical to the very nature of South Park, and to how Stone and Parker have built their careers. South Park was inevitably going to end up on the side that it has, because progressiveness was always going to be counterintuitive to their own beliefs. That's my interpretation of this anyways, and it's my video, so I guess that makes me God here. Now comes the point where I have to combine the various threads and rants and points and analysis and random ass statements I said into a cohesive final comment that not only gives a sense of clarity to the audience, but also finality. The realization that this right here is the last and truest word on the topic. I've never been good at these. Generally, I feel like you can tell what I think from having watched the video, and if you're skipping to this point just to get an idea of what I think, then let me say that South Park is pretty transphobic. It uses a lot of stereotypes in a way that is vague enough to allow the audience to interpret it in the worst and most egregious possible manners, regardless of the ultimately carefree and careless intent of the creators. The bright and good spots of trans stuff that I covered, and I hesitate to use the word representation because while trans people were represented by characters, not many, if any at all of them, were actually trans, well, those spots were inconsistent and rare to the degree that they would not define the total experience. At the end of the day, though, this isn't the comprehensive last word on South Park. It isn't probably even my comprehensive last word on the subject. I fully expect South Park to release another trans episode at some point that I will probably end up feeling obliged to cover. I also did exclude or not really bother diving into some stuff, partly because I didn't want to, and partly because it would add a lot of time to keep saying the same things that I've already said about the series multiple times already. Multiple examples are useful for really illustrating a problem, but I felt like I had plenty of those, so you gotta draw the line somewhere. All I can really hope is that if you are a fan of South Park, a hater of South Park, and unaware of South Park, or whatever other variants or combinations might exist, that you got something from this. Whether that be learning something, having something you suspected confirmed, or being entertained by what I said or how I said it. Ultimately, that is all I can really hope for with what I create. And I hope that I did a good enough job that it was convincing for somebody. With that said, thank you for watching the video. If you did enjoy this, then please consider giving it a like, share, subscribe, and comment. Alternatively, if you have the connections to get me locked in a room with Matt Stone and Trey Parker, I would love to talk to them about this whole thing. Like, really present these positions and arguments and hear what they have to say in their own words that nobody else seems to have really challenged them on. I'm no interviewer, but I am obnoxious and forward, which I think makes me perfect for this job. Other than that, if you really like what I do, then you can go to my Patreon and subscribe as a member, give money on my Ko-Fi, or even subscribe here on YouTube. All the people in the $5 and up category should be scrolling past the screen right now. And I really do appreciate all the people on there for helping me to do this as something akin to a job. Those consistent sources of income help a lot to cover the base costs of rent, power, internet, and electricity, all of which I do need to be able to keep doing the videos, and that the New Zealand government unfortunately doesn't subsidise for artistes such as myself. I also do occasionally buy muffins with it. I am in the works currently on a subscriber milestone Q&A which got postponed so I could focus on this video, but will be hopefully releasing in January when I get back from my Christmas holiday. Yet again though, thank you for watching this video. I mean, seriously, this thing is a long and painful rant that took ages to write and record and edit, and I'm assuming took ages to watch. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.